Okay, I think we're going to get started. Thank you all for being here today and those online. I'd like to welcome you to this public meeting for the New England District Regulatory Program's implementation of the nationwide permits, hosted by the Army Corps of Engineers. My name is Grace Moses, and I am the Chief of the Technical Support Branch for the Regulatory Division at New England District. And we have Chandra Sterling from our Public Affairs Office. She's going to help monitor the Teams chat and help share the moderator facilitator role with me today. Today's meeting provides an opportunity to review the Army Corps of Engineers, or UTC's, implementation of the nationwide permits, which will go into effect on March 15th of this year. We'll go through the nationwide permits general and regional conditions and show those nationwides that have been granted a conditional 401 water quality certification. We'll also note continuing and future permitting tools that will streamline the process and continue to provide a level of service that you've come to expect. We're really excited to take you through a tour of the Regulatory Request System, or RRS, for the submittal of pre-construction notifications, review of public notices, and other upcoming features of the portal. It's really snazzy. We'll also cover some specifics like endangered species, Section 408s, and historic properties. While we do request that questions be held until the end, we really do want to hear from you. So we will have a dedicated question and answer section at the end. And we'll also be hanging around for about an hour after the meeting to have one-on-ones, project-specific questions, that kind of thing. Please sign in at the side if you haven't already done so. And we're also going to have a survey at the end that we'd appreciate your participation in. It'll help us determine what information we need to continue sharing. Please note that the meeting is being recorded and it will be hosted on our project website for anybody that isn't able to be here that might have wanted to be here. And I'm now going to introduce Chuck Corbett with Rhode, who's going to come up and say hello.
Thanks everybody for being here. We're hosting this great thing to introduce kind of the new things that are going on at Army Corps here in Rhode Island. Just some housekeeping things. Restrooms are directly across the hallway. Both men's and ladies' rooms are right there. If you have water bottles that you need to fill, there is a water bottle filling station also between the two restrooms there. If you get like the munchies or need something else to drink other than water, like coffee, there's a cafe downstairs on the second floor, Nero's Cafe, which has basically everything that you need down there. I can't think of anything. What's that? Emergency exits. So I have to think about that. So there are two stairways for emergency exits. One, if you take a left out of this room and a right down the next hallway, halfway down the hallway is a stairway that can be used as an emergency exit. Or you can take a right and all the way at the end of the hallway, there is another stairway there. Either of those are some gonna get you out of the building that so I think that about
Great. Thank you so much, Chuck. And thank you so much to Rhode for hosting us today. Nice and warm in here. And we're going to begin the presentation with some remarks from Tammy Turley. She's the Chief of the Regulatory Division. So kick it off, Tammy.
Thank you. Thank you. We didn't do a safety moment about these cords that we have to navigate this morning. Goodness. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Again, I'm Tammy Turley, the Regulatory Division Chief, so implementing the regulatory program in all 6 of our New England states. We appreciate the nice warm room. Yesterday we were in coastal Connecticut and we were pretty cold for the several hours that we were there. So we appreciate the warm room and greatly appreciate and there'll be more throughout the next couple of hours. But thanks for the room, and we appreciate the partnership with both Rhode and CRMC. It's important that we maintain transparency in the differences in our program and then where we do align. So we're here today to keep improving that transparency. We wanted to talk about our outreach event schedule. If you have colleagues or want to join us for another event, this is our schedule. We're heading to New Hampshire tomorrow, then Massachusetts, then Maine. And then after our outreach face-to-face schedule, we're going to be starting a webinar series. And so we're really looking forward to getting feedback from you today regarding what you'd like to hear more about. So what details that we're just touching on today that you want us to cover in the webinar series. So we'll likely have several months of webinars. Is it more on specific nationwides or the application process? Maybe it's Endangered Species Act. So let us know. We'll be talking to you a couple of times today, hoping that you'll fill out our survey, and so then we can tailor and design those webinars based on your feedback. So looking forward to receiving that. Grace went over our agenda topics. I don't mind questions while I'm speaking, so I'll ask at the end of my intro here if you have any just big, broad questions for me. So first, we'll start with our regulatory authorities. The two primary authorities that we implement in our regulatory program are Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, where we have authority to issue permits and evaluate work and structures affecting navigable waters. And then Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, where we have the authority to regulate the discharge of dredged or fill material into waters of the U.S., including wetlands. And you'll see in some of the nationwide permits that we're going to cover today, some of them cover Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, some of them cover Section 10, and some of them cover both. So that's definitely something to look for when you're evaluating what type of authorization you'll need for your proposed project. And then I wanted to talk about the two different types of permits that we have in the regulatory program. The two types are general permits and individual permits. And under that broad category of general permits, there are three types. The first is nationwide permits, which we're here to talk about today. And those are issued by our headquarters office every 5 years. The regulatory districts provide supplemental documentation and design regional conditions to supplement those nationwide permits. And then we put out that public notice advertising the use of those nationwides in our district. Regional general permits, which is what you're most used to, those can be issued by the district or division engineer, and they're typically for a geographic area. It could be a county, could be a water body, it could be a state. So traditionally in New England, we have issued general permits in each of our states. And then programmatic general permits are typically based on a local, county, or state permitting agency, and we design to align with that permitting agency. So there's essentially overlap with those authorities and less duplication. All right, so if you've taken a look at our general permits that we've issued over the past 5 years, a lot of that language should be aligned with the nationwide permits. We've made sure to use the definitions and terminology in the nationwide. So as we transition to the nationwide permits, we're familiar with that language. Nationwide permits, again, are a type of general permit, and those should be designed to be no more than minimal, both individually and cumulatively, and they're activity specific. So there'll be a nationwide or general permit for a certain activity, like maintenance activities, bank stabilization, certain types of development. As I mentioned, the regional general permits have been designed to look like the nationwide. So this transition, some of them will look exactly the same. The title will just be different. Others will be slightly different, and we'll go over those differences today. We did want to point out, if you have a regional general permit that's been verified by the district, that permit is good through its expiration date. And then if you're under contract to commence, or if you've commenced the work, that provides an additional 12 months of coverage to finish that work. So the general permits that have already been verified, again, they don't expire when the nationwides come into play March 15th. They are good based on the letter that you already have from us. And then the nationwide permit timeline, we started late in 2024 talking with our federal and state partners about what the transition looked like, and mostly designing regional conditions to supplement those nationwide permits and general conditions that come with the nationwide permits from headquarters. We established our public notice mid last year, and then we had our public outreach events in July of last year with those proposed regional conditions. And thanks to anyone that provided comments on those regional conditions, we actually put out that second public notice with some clarifying statements, making sure that we've captured all of the great feedback we received from the public and our agency partners. We've mostly been evaluating public comments to finalize our regional conditions over the past couple months. And then we're here in the center bottom of that slide. Essentially, in January of this year, headquarters posted the final nationwide permits with final general conditions, and those needed to be posted at least 60 days prior to the implementation date of March 15th. And then we've proposed those final regional conditions that are being reviewed now by our division office, the North Atlantic Division. And once those are approved and finalized, we'll put out our final public notice advertising the nationwide permits, the general conditions, and then our regional conditions that we designed with all of you. So any big picture questions for me before I turn it over to Birdie? Sure. Yep, we can do that. Let's start with Dan. We'll just do some quick introductions of our team. And again, we want to stay around after the presentations and answer one-on-one questions and walk through things with you. So Dan, if you'd introduce yourself.
Jason Gamble. I'm the Connecticut, Rhode Island Section Chief. Evan Newton. I'm a project manager with transportation and utility.
Moses, Kendra Sterling, Public Affairs.
Morning, everyone. Craig Jarlett, Massachusetts Section Chief. Good morning, Colin Greenan, New Hampshire and Vermont Section Chief.
I'm Rhode. I am a project manager in the technical support branch. Elizabeth Waterhouse, senior project manager, Rhode Island. Nancy Coleman, for total resource manager, personnel division, and tribal.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Jeff Willis, Iceland, Coastal Zone Management Program.
All right.
And
Any
I
of that
already
shot?
introduced myself, Bob Albright, Deputy Administrator.
All right. Any questions for me before I turn it over to Birdie? Okay. Be careful.
We will not screen over this part today.
All right. Hi, everyone. I know I just introduced myself, but I am Birdie Budnig. Some of you may recognize me. We've probably been on a lot of Teams meetings together. I've been helping to lead the district's transition to utilizing the nationwide permits. And I'm super excited that I get to be in New England this week with all of these awesome people. Okay, so kind of some background. We thought it would be helpful to illustrate our headquarters roles, the district's roles, and our state agency partners' roles in the nationwide permit program. As Tammy previously said, our headquarters issues the nationwide permits every 5 years. So every 5 years, they announce proposed changes to the nationwide permits along with the general conditions and any proposed changes to the general conditions. And then they issue them through the Federal Register. At the district level, we don't actually issue nationwide permits. We verify proposed activities under those already issued nationwide permits. But during the headquarters reissuance efforts, as Tammy was saying, we develop regional conditions to the nationwide permit so that we can ensure that the nationwide permits remain minimally impacting both individually and cumulatively within our New England region. And all districts do this. We also can add special conditions to case-by-case verifications of the nationwide permits. So, you know, as a pre-construction application is being reviewed, if there's any additional conditions outside of the general and regional conditions that need to be added to the verification just to ensure that minimal impact, we would add those specific to the verification. And a lot of times you'll see those conditions related to endangered species or EFH or Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. And then our state agency partners, we asked a lot of them with this transition. What the districts do is we request water quality certification from our state agency partners, the state certifying authority and the EPA as for federal lands and tribal lands if the tribe is not the certifying authority. We also ask the states for coastal zone management, consistency determination, concurrence, that's a lot of words. And so during that reissuance process, the state certifying authority and the CZM, Coastal Zone Management Office, is reviewing the nationwide permits. The general conditions are proposed regional conditions, and they're deciding whether to certify those under Section 401 of the Clean Water Act and under the coastal zone, and concur with their determination of consistency under the Coastal Zone Management Act. So again, as previously mentioned, our headquarters issued the nationwide permits for 2026 earlier this year, January 8th. That link will take you directly to the Federal Register notice and that amazing Dino QR code that I just recently learned how to make. I'm very proud of that. These guys are probably tired of hearing me talk about it. But that will also take you directly to the Federal Register notice. And if you're familiar with Federal Register notices, there's always a preamble that essentially talks about why decisions were made the way they were made, any comments received, the responses to those comments, and the reasons for the final outcome of the action. I realize this is really tiny text, but this is the list of all the 2026 nationwide permits. Yeah, the ones that are listed in red are those nationwide permits that the district is not going to implement, either because we have regional general permits that we're going to continue to utilize that cover those activities, or they cover activities that we don't typically see in New England. And so we don't really see a need to utilize those nationwide permits. The one in green is a brand new nationwide permit. It's nationwide permit 60, activities to improve passage of fish and other aquatic organisms. That's the only reason it's in green, is because it's brand new. And if you look closely, there's a few numbers missing, and that's because at the national level, those nationwide permits have been revoked. You'll see that 156 is still listed, but it says revoked nationwide. It was proposed to be revoked, and it was in this 2026 issuance. The next thing, also these guys are probably going to get tired of hearing me talk about because I love this chart. This is the 2026 nationwide permit summary chart. This is on our headquarters website. That link and Dino QR code will take you directly to our headquarters website where you can access this chart. This is just the first page of the chart. It's got nationwide permits 1 through 6 on the first page, but it's just an example of what this chart provides. So if you are an applicant or a consultant and you've got a project and you're not sure which nationwide permit it might fit under, this chart is really handy dandy. You can skim through the nationwide permits very quickly at a glance to see what it authorizes, what the notification requirements are, where it's applicable, and you can kind of get an idea of which nationwide permits might cover your activity. Then you can go to those nationwide permits and read them and get the full language and really understand if that nationwide permit might work for your proposed activity. I love this chart. I recommend people save it to their desktop or print it out and keep it handy, especially even for people. I suggest that too, especially. One of my other favorite parts of this chart is that changes column. Previously, when the 2026 nationwide permits were being proposed, that column was called proposed changes. So it will tell you what the difference is between the last nationwide permit is the difference between the last nationwide permit and the current nationwide permit. So you can see 1 through 6, there were no changes from the 2021 nationwide permit to the 2026 nationwide permit, but there were a handful of changes throughout the nationwide permits, and this chart will summarize those changes. So if you don't feel like reading the preamble in the Federal Register, this is a great resource to tell you what changed. Okay, so one of the main differences between the nationwide permits and the current regional general permits is the impacts thresholds between the two of them. Our regional general permits typically authorize up to 1 acre of impacts to waters of the US, and that includes all permanent, temporary, and secondary impacts. The nationwide permits, on the other hand, typically only authorize up to half an acre of loss of waters. And I'm going to caveat that half acre. Some nationwide permits authorize more, some authorize less, but on average, half an acre is what you see most commonly. But it's that phrase loss of waters that is where the main difference is. So the phrase loss of waters is defined in the nationwide permit program as part of the final issuance. So it's found in that Federal Register notice, and it's defined as waters of the U.S. that are permanently adversely affected by filling, flooding, excavation, or drainage because of the regulated activity. So what that means is waters of the U.S. that are temporarily filled, flooded, excavated, drained, but then they're restored to pre-construction contours and elevations. Those impacts are not included in that half acre. They're not considered a loss of waters because they're restored. And with that, I'm going to pass this to Beth.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. It's nice to see some of your faces again and meet others. So the transition in March from the 2025 GPs to the nationwide permits. If you have an existing, Tammy went over this, but if you have an existing verification, you don't need another one. They'll all expire when the general permit expiration dates, as you can see below. So after March 15th, we'll be utilizing nationwide permits to process new PCN submissions. So I'm going to review a comparison between an existing RGP and nationwide permit for development projects. I know the text is tiny on the slide, but it's not important here. I'm just touching on what Tammy mentioned, that the language is very similar from the general permits to the nationwide permits because we based the general permit language off the nationwides. So you can see how they look now on the left and then how they'll look in the nationwide permits on the right. So here are the same text descriptions I showed in the previous slide with general permit 16 on the left and the nearly identical description of nationwide permit 39 on the right for commercial and institutional developments. Obviously, some other activity comparisons are going to be not as straightforward and will be more complex, but most of the descriptions remain the same between the general permits and the nationwide permits. So the difference to note here is that nationwides separate residential projects into their own category and separate permit and aren't lumped together like the general permit 16. So that's kind of a common theme with the nationwides too, is instead of lumping, they're splitting. So if you're a soil scientist, there's lumpers and splitters. Anyway, so this comparison slide shows the same RGP nationwide permit comparison with the limits, thresholds, and waters that they apply to, and displays a simplification of the thresholds with the nationwides, stating plainly a PCN submission is required for all projects. The biggest change from GPs to nationwide permits is that limits have been reduced, as Bertie went into, for projects that have potential for higher environmental impacts, like larger development projects that will require a further environmental review. And this is a handy chart comparison showing the existing general permit numbers and then the corresponding nationwide permit numbers and the descriptions there. You can access this online after we post a presentation or email me for it. It's it's just a handy thing to have to ease in your transition from the general permits to nationwides. And I'm going to pass the presentation back to Bertie now to discuss general and regional general conditions.
There we go. Careful about this torch. All right. Thanks, Beth. Okay. So we want to talk about pre-construction notification or PCN under both the regional general permits and the nationwide permits, because we're still going to use some of our regional general permits. The regional general permits right now have two categories, the self-verification or SV and pre-construction notification, that PCN. I might use both PCN and pre-construction notification, so I apologize. If you forget what PCN means, just ask. But the way it works for most of our state regional general permits is if your project qualifies for self-verification, the applicant completes a self-verification notification form, which is kind of fun to say, then sends it to us, and we look it over and say, yes, this qualifies for self-verification, or no, actually, sorry, this doesn't qualify. You need to submit a pre-construction notification. And for those regional general permits that we will continue to use, that process is going to continue. But the nationwide permits, they don't have a self-verification notification form. It doesn't exist under the nationwide permits. Instead, the nationwide permits have two categories: non-PCN, which we also call non-notifying or non-reporting, and PCN, or notifying or reporting. Each nationwide permit states when a pre-construction notification is required. If it doesn't explicitly state when a pre-construction notification is required, that means that nationwide permit is non-notifying. That means applicants don't need to submit any type of paperwork to the Corps, and they are authorized to do their project. We're going to talk later in our presentation about our regulatory request system and an upcoming tool that the Corps has developed to help applicants determine if their proposed project requires a pre-construction notification or if it's non-notifying. Craig will talk about that later on in the presentation. And that's kind of the constant, though. Although there's different processes for notification and verification under the regional general permits and the nationwide permits, that regulatory request system is the constant. We have started accepting pre-construction notifications and those self-verification notification forms through RRS. There will be no change to that when we switch to the nationwide permits and start to utilize the nationwide permits. The RRS offers a very simple platform to submit your project information and get your pre-construction notification to a project manager faster than if you were to submit it via email. We are highly encouraging folks to utilize the RRS. It has the capacity to accept large file sizes that our email may not. You know how things get lost in cyberspace and then you have no idea if we actually received your information or not. But RRS can accept very large files, and you get an automated response so that you know we received it, and you'll get information about your project manager and their contact information quickly through RRS. And again, Craig will talk more about that. Right now, I want to take you through some examples of what the nationwide permits look like and how you can determine, without using a tool, just through reading the nationwide permits, whether or not they require notification. So this nationwide permit is 5 scientific measurement devices. This is the entire permit, and you'll see that it doesn't mention notification anywhere. This is how our non-notifying nationwide permits look. They just don't explicitly state anything about notification. And there are 20 of these nationwide permits that are non-notifying per their specific terms. The next example is 17 hydropower projects. Again, this is the entire permit, but you'll see it has a notification section there at the end. This is an example of a nationwide permit that is notifying for every single proposed activity. So it says the permittee must submit a pre-construction notification to the district engineer prior to commencing the activity. That means you cannot build your hydropower project under this nationwide permit without first receiving a verification letter from the Corps. There are 21 nationwide permits that require PCN like this for all activities. The next category is like nationwide permit 14, which is linear transportation projects. And again, this is the entire permit for linear transportation projects. And you'll notice that for this nationwide permit, the notification is a little bit more, the notification requirements are a little bit more complicated. You got to think about it a little bit more. But for this particular nationwide permit, notification is required if the loss of waters would be greater than 1/10 of an acre, or if there's a discharge of dredged or fill material into a special aquatic site, which includes wetlands. So if a project doesn't meet or exceed either of these thresholds, notification is not required. But if either one of these thresholds is met or exceeded, notification is required, and you have to receive a verification letter from the Corps before you can construct your linear transportation project. There are 16 nationwide permits that are notifying in some cases for some activities. There are caveats to this though. So this is one area you should look at when trying to determine if your project requires a PCN. You need to read the nationwide permit. That summary chart will also tell you the notification requirements, which is, again, one of the reasons why I love that chart. The next couple places you should look are the general conditions and the regional conditions. So this is just an example. This is not an inclusive list of the general conditions and the regional conditions that trigger, we use that word, trigger a notification, a pre-construction notification. So even if the nationwide permit you want to work under doesn't require a pre-construction notification, if you're working in a wild and scenic river, or your project is in the range of endangered species, or there's a historic property nearby, it's likely you need to submit a pre-construction notification to us, even though that nationwide permit doesn't require a PCN on its own. We have a handful of regional conditions that are going to trigger pre-construction notification as well. And you'll see when we publish our final regional conditions, they will all have, the ones that have that additional pre-construction notification requirement start with that. As you can see, this one is an example of our regional condition A, which is additional PCN requirement for specific resources. So even if your nationwide permit that you want to work under is non-notifying, if you would be impacting a specific resource listed in this table at these acreages or square feet, a PCN would be required. We want to look at that. We want to review that. So this here is just the list of our general conditions. These are the general conditions that our headquarters issues with the nationwide permits. The ones in green, they're highlighted because we're going to specifically focus on those topics. We've already talked about 27 regional and case by case or special conditions. And with that, I'm going to pass it. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm still going to, I have one more slide. My apologies. So with the general conditions, they're very general. They're issued nationwide. They have to be general in order to apply in all different areas of the nation. And one thing we have done to help folks achieve compliance with these conditions is added notes to those general conditions to offer suggestions on how you can comply with those general conditions. This is an example of general condition 11 for equipment, which basically says, you know, heavy equipment working in wetlands and mudflats must be placed on mats, but then it says, or other measures must be taken to minimize soil disturbance. It's a little bit vague. And so we've added notes that point the applicant, the permittee, in the direction of how they can comply with that. And there's a handful of those notes on the nationwide permits. Oh, I might have one more slide. I might have lied. General condition 32 also has a list of what's required for a complete pre-construction notification. RRS is going to really help you achieve a complete PCN, pre-construction notification, if you utilize it, because it won't let you go further without answering all the questions. So as long as you answer the questions and don't just write NA, or, you know, if you actually put your project information in there, you should achieve a complete PCN, hopefully on the first try. But we do oftentimes find that PMs need to request additional information. I'm not going to read what's on the slide here to you, but this is just an example of common things that we tend to have to ask for when we receive PCNs. And with that, now it's to Nancy.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I have to laugh with Birdie because we've been rearranging our slides to try and make it the most easily understood and digestible slide deck. So I was launched and ready to come up and speak, and then nope, it wasn't quite yet my turn. So it's my turn. It's nice to see some of your faces again from our July outreach. If you recall, in July, I did a deep dive into General Condition 20 historic properties, the nationwide permit general condition for compliance under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. And today, this slide, I'll just provide the high-level summary of General Condition 20, and then thereafter we'll go into some more details of the similarities and the differences with Rhode Island's Regional General Permit General Condition for historic properties. And again, want to underline more similarities than differences for the general condition for consideration of historic properties. So A through E for General Condition 20A, no activity is authorized under any nationwide permit, which may have the potential to cause effects on historic properties until all requirements of Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act are satisfied. B, for federal permittees, they should follow their own procedures for complying with Section 106 and then provide that documentation of compliance to the Corps within their pre-construction notification. C, non-federal permittees must submit a pre-construction notification if the nationwide permit activity may or might have the potential to cause effects on historic properties, including locations with the potential for unknown historic properties. The prospective permittee may seek information on historic properties from the State Historic Preservation Officer, Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, a review of the National Register of Historic Places, and then to include any of that information gathered during that outreach or that review of the NRHP within the PCN submittal to the Corps. D, if historic properties are identified or the nationwide permit activity may cause effects on historic properties, the applicant or permittee cannot begin the activity until so notified by our agency. Lastly, Section 110K of the NHPA prevents our agency from granting a permit or assistance to any applicant who intentionally avoids the requirements of Section 106 and or intentionally adversely affects an historic property. Echoing back to what Birdie was saying earlier, general conditions are issued by our headquarters along with the nationwide permit package. And so at the district level, we cannot change or alter the general condition, but we can make conditions more regional conditions. But to the general conditions, we can add notes to assist the prospective permittee with complying with that general condition. So the note that we have proposed and is now going to be final shortly for the New England District, NAE is New England District. Our note for General Condition 20, the following link to the Corps' website provides SHPO and TIPO contact information and additional procedures to expedite the Corps' regulatory review regarding the National Historic Preservation Act. Please contact the appropriate SHPO and or TIPO based on the geographic location of the regulated activity. Of course, right now we have a link pending. The paragraph at the bottom half of this slide, again, all of this is in the works. We're reworking and reorganizing our website as we stroll towards mid-March for the implementation of the nationwide permits in the New England District. So all of it is under construction right now, but our intent is to maintain an updated, up-to-date contact living document of the appropriate contact information for the 6 state historic preservation officers and the New England tribes and those tribes with ancestral ties that have interest in our geographic location, the updated contact information for the tribal historic preservation officers for that outreach to seek information on known historic properties and or the potential for historic properties. This next graphic I like in its simplicity. Currently, we have the 6 New England states. We have 6 state regional general permit general conditions for the consideration of historic properties. So in Rhode Island, we have general condition 11. And as Beth mentioned earlier, a lot of our general conditions within the regional general permits are very similar to the general conditions of the nationwide permits. So moving to the nationwide permits in mid-March provides consistency for those working across state lines. For example, it's going to be the same process, the same language as working in the other states for the same type of nationwide permit activity. Again, general conditions, a general condition 24 historic properties. Bertie mentioned it could be a trigger to trigger pre-construction notification. If A, B, C, D, and E are not encountered, do not occur, then general condition 20 in and of itself does not trigger a pre-construction notification, right? It's still a non-notifying, non-PCN activity, but there could be another general condition that triggers the need for a pre-construction notification to be submitted to the Corps. This last slide compares the language of existing Rhode Island Regional General Permit, General Condition 11, with nationwide permits, General Condition 20. The underlined are just highlighting some of the key differences, but really you can see bottom line up front, more similar than different. A lot of the language was taken from the nationwide permit general conditions to inform when we developed the general conditions for the RGPs. A equals A and C on the right. On the left, let's see, I've underlined SV. So again, no self-verification under the nationwide permits. But then also SV applicants shall notify the Rhode Island SHPO and appropriate TIPOs. So the language now within general condition 20, we do not use shall, it's may seek information on historic properties. I wanted to highlight something at the bottom and I think I forgot, but that's okay. And then on the right, that same comparison. So under C, may seek information. Yes, we strongly encourage prospective permittees to seek information from the State Historic Preservation Officer, Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, and of course a review of the NRHP, because it's much better upfront to identify if there are any historic properties or the potential for or any concerns at that project location. Of course, earlier identification is better. No one wants to identify an historic resource when equipment is being staged, or worse yet, if construction starts. So it's always better to try and seek information, and any of that information provided by the SHPO and or TIPOs or the review of the NRHP, we would encourage the submittal of that information within the pre-construction notification. Lastly, E in general condition 20 underlined section 110K of the NHPA, which we discussed on my first slide. Again, want to highlight the similarities, and that if general condition 20 doesn't trigger the need for a pre-construction notification, none of those A through E have been triggered, then general condition 20 does not cause the need for pre-construction notification to be submitted to the Corps.
Another general condition that could trigger pre-construction notification is general condition 18, endangered species, which requires applicants to submit a PCN if any listed or proposed species or designated or proposed critical habitat is in the vicinity of the project area or might be affected by the project. If you can get to know on both of those, then your project can stay non-notifying under general condition 18, but then there might be, as Nancy said, there might be another trigger. We are, well, I'll talk about resources next. So to figure out if your project area might have endangered species in the vicinity or might be impacted, there are resources that Fish and Wildlife Service has put out, as well as National Marine Fisheries Service. IPAC, the Information for Planning Consultation, is a really great tool that Fish and Wildlife Service has applicants go through, Corps people go through for applicants. And then the ESA mapper from NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Service, also can give you information on species that might be in your project area. It really helps core project managers if you submit this information, if you go through IPAC or the ESA mapper and get your species list or designated critical habitat or post critical habitat and submit that. It helps us target our review and work with Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA. There are also IPAC's a little ahead of NOAA in that they have determination keys to help people step through kind of like a dichotomous key, if this, then that. But it does get you through to an effect determination for project managers. We do that. But we do encourage applicants to also play with the D keys because it gives you a sense of how you could design your project to avoid or minimize impacts, such as for the bats, avoiding a time of year, certain distances from areas that might be more sensitive. We're also working to put out information on applications that are going to be coming into us that might have the potential for no effect to species. So we're working with our local Fish and Wildlife Service offices to come up with instructions for applicants. We will be public noticing those, so please keep an eye out. They will be coming out before the implementation of nationwide permits, because we do recognize that particularly the bats, the northern long-eared bat and the tricolored bat, they come up pretty much everywhere. So it should help you with those procedures. Moving, oh, sorry, one more. Yeah, that's exactly what I just said. And then monarch butterfly too. We're hoping to have some instructions on monarchs, even though they're proposed. And keep an eye out for a public notice. And then one more for me with general conditions. 31 is in relation to projects that might be near a federal project, proposed projects that may be near a federal project. We have mappers that can help you determine if your project is potentially near a core project, which may include a levee, a federal navigation project. Those need permission from the Corps before they can proceed. It doesn't come through regulatory, it comes through our other technical offices, and that's a different permission process, but we do have process guides on our website, and we're happy to put you in touch. Your Corps PM can put you in touch with the appropriate 408 points of contact. We also have points of contact if you want to go straight there yourself. We have them. The New England district, we also share a boundary with the New York district. It cuts through part of Massachusetts and Vermont. So if you're in that area, which in Rhode Island, I don't expect you to be, but maybe you're a national outfit, the NAN website will get you to those POCs. That's New York district, sorry, NAN. We also have regional conditions, as Bertie said, that might trigger notification. So we'll talk about a few of those. Unfortunately, we don't have the regional conditions finalized yet, but they will be soon. They have to be approved at our division level, and that is ongoing right now. When they are approved, we will issue an information public notice with the finalized version of those regional conditions. We have a feeling they're going to be very similar, if not the exact same, of the October 28th proposed regional conditions that we put out on public notice on October 28th. This QR code will take you there, and you can always talk to us as well. And again, they'll be finalized before implementation of the nationwide permits. One of those regional conditions is in regards to essential fish habitat. That's regional condition J. And National Marine Fisheries Service, NMFS, they granted general concurrence for the nationwide permits that are shown in the table. Those are the non-notifying activities. So if your project meets the terms and conditions of our pro-rata consultation, which I'll get into in a second, then you can proceed with your activity as non-notifying if it fits in the terms and conditions of the nationwide and all the other general conditions. It just means that the Magnuson-Stevens Act and Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act compliance is satisfied. So what I was talking about, you don't stop there. You have to look at our Essential Fish Habitat and Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act programmatic consultation, which is available on our website. We have a whole EFH website dedicated to this topic. And there are Appendix A, you can just jump right to your activity, and that will list out the thresholds as well as the conservation recommendations. If your activity exceeds a threshold, then you cannot be non-notifying. You have to come in and talk with us. And if you cannot implement the conservation recommendations, you also need to come in and talk with us. So those will require PCNs. Otherwise, for non-notifying activities, for those notifying activities, then you're still encouraged, if you know, for example, that you're going to have to do a PCN regardless, we still encourage you to look at the EFHPC and design your project perhaps under the thresholds and implement those conservation recommendations, because it'll really streamline our coordination with National Marine Fisheries Service. But if you can't, that's okay. We will help you get there. And this is essentially what I already said. The federal applicants, they'll follow their own procedures for compliance with the Magnuson-Stevens Act and Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act. Submit that information to us when you submit your PCN if you need to do so. And like I said, here is the link to our dedicated EFH website. And now I am going to kick it off to Mason.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. In addition to being the Rhode Island, Connecticut section chief, I'm also the 401 water quality certification subject matter expert for the New England district. So I'm just going to touch on this very briefly. Our state partners are going to present on the state 401 and the Coastal Zone Management Act concurrence for the nationwides coming up at the end. But just to cover, we worked very closely with them, and they put in a huge effort for us when we were issuing these nationwides to go through and ended up granting with conditions the 401, and on the next slide, I'll show you as well, it parallels it with the Coastal Zone Management Act consistency, all of the nationwides, except for 32 and 43. So if you're performing an activity under any of the nationwides, as long as it meets all of the conditions of the general 401 that they've issued and the Coastal Zone Management Act consistency that coincides with our general and regional conditions under that appropriate nationwide, you will have already satisfied all the requirements for Section 401 and for the Coastal Zone Management Act. So very important that you review the 401, make sure that you're able to meet those conditions. If not, in those situations, you would have to go back to the state for an individual 401, or if it's something else that you need to come to us for because you can't meet the conditions, or it's one of these denied nationwides, we will go and work on getting consistency determination for the Coastal Zone Management Act if required as well. So I'll let them touch on this more at the end. And please, if anyone has any questions at the end on 401 or this, or would like to talk to me afterwards, I'll be around. Thank you.
Hi. It's good to see our Coast Guard friends. Are there any other federal agencies here? Yes, ma'am. You. Oh, great. Thanks. Awesome. And I was talking with one of you earlier, and I recognize that these aren't billable hours. So if you need a file number to bill to, I'd be happy to provide that afterwards. But no, really, thank you for being here, taking time out of your day. So to kind of wrap up nationwide permit, it's really important to understand there's like 5-stop shopping. It's like Walmart here. Fitting the terms of the nationwide. So Bertie went over that. You know, you have the nationwide permit, says what activity. Those are the terms, okay? And then you go to the next step, applicable regional or applicable general conditions. You know, is there anything in there sneaking up on you? So reviewing those. And I'm holding a copy of the nationwides, my friend. This is the document, the QR code that Bertie gave you. That it's 100+ pages, but really it's the last 30 pages that is how you do it. It lists the nationwide's the general conditions. So it's the bulk of that document is the why, and then these last pages are the how. So those general conditions. And we presented the regional general conditions. I got enough gray. I'm still a paper guy in a way. I've got all the regional general conditions here, so you're going to want to check those. And then if we do verify an activity, there may be special conditions, time of year, compensatory mitigation, perhaps Endangered Species Act or essential fish habitat. And again, as we step down, our water quality certification, we're blessed in Rhode Island to have granted with conditions for almost all of the nationwide. So thank you. But making sure that you review that water quality certification and the conditions. And again, coastal zone management, making sure you review that. So it's really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 checks as you move through this process. And we always say this, we're here to help you. If you have trouble understanding the why of a general condition or a regional general condition, we're here to help you unpack that and help you get through this process. We always put a caveat that any verification or authorization from the Corps of Engineers is not a supplement for any state process or local process. So you may still need to go through those. And I think our RIDEM partners are here, which is great. So that's where we're at today. We're always excited to look to the future. How can we keep improving? How can we keep doing things better for the regulated community, for folks that need permits from the Corps of Engineers? So we've talked about nationwides today. We've been operating on regional general permits. Again, I'm holding in front of me the nationwide permits, and a couple things stick out. Dredging. The nationwide for dredging doesn't afford a lot of dredging. And in New England, we have a lot of dredging activities. Had some pre-apps with the Coast Guard that their proposal may not be eligible for nationwide permit. I think it's 25 cubic yards, really, really minor. Removal of low head dams. We've got a lot of dams in New England, right? A lot of mills, a lot of small hydropower projects. There's a lot of interest in pulling them out. The nationwide doesn't really accommodate that. Boat ramps in the nationwide permit program are really looking at private, small homeowners. They don't look at our state Fish and Wildlife partners that work on public boat ramps. So there's some gaps there, right? And so there's opportunities for us to fill those gaps in a different way. So we're going to retain usage of some of our regional general permits throughout the New England states while we develop new tools. And so in Rhode Island, we're going to continue to utilize these 4 general permits. Why moorings? Because the nationwide permit for moorings does not cover commercial vessels. So we want to utilize our RGP for commercial. If it is a private mooring, Beth and the gang will probably use nationwide permit first. We're always going to look towards the nationwide permits. And then if we can't fit them, we're going to look at these other tools. Structures and navigable waters, docks, piers, swim floats, recreational floats. Again, the nationwides doesn't necessarily cover those structures. So we're going to retain use of that. Again, dredging remains to be a big activity or a frequent activity in New England that's not does not provide coverage in our nationwides as well. And then again, I mentioned dam removals. Nationwide permit 27 and nationwide 53. 27 doesn't cover dam removals. That's aquatic restoration. This general permit really looks a lot like nationwide permit 27, but it does not cover that dam removal where our GPs do. And the dam removal nationwide permit is really for small low head dams. So we're going to continue using these. Again, we're going to look to nationwides first, but that's a tool that we have up until the RGPs in Rhode Island expire. So we got plans. Maine has developed some RGPs for these activities, and we're looking to expand on those for all of the New England states. So developing some of these RGPs for all the states. So we've talked about retention of some. So the next thing we wanted to present to you is letters of permission. So letters of permission are a type of individual permit. We use them across the country for Section 10 activities or structures in navigable waters in the United States. So This is not a new tool. It's a tool that we have. We haven't used a lot of LOPs in New England because we've had RGPs for those structures in navigable waters. But it's important to note that it's an abbreviated processing procedure. It's where the work is minor and would not have significant individual or cumulative impacts, and no appreciable opposition. We still have to consult under Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, and Magnuson-Stevens Act for essential fish habitat. Typically, for a letter of permission under Section 10, we would be coordinating that with our state partners to determine if a water quality certification would be required or coastal zone management consistency determination would be required. So again, that's a case-by-case basis, and we look at our partners to help with those decisions. That's Section 10. We've had it. What we want to do is we want to develop letters of permission for 2 activities. As we've rolled out the nationwide permits, we've heard back from our partners, from our stakeholders that, but what about developments? Housing remains an issue in New England. There's not a lot of places to develop housing, commercial development. This half-acre threshold in the nationwides may not work as well for us. So we'd like to develop letters of permission for these 2 activities, as well as dam removal here. So what does that look like? A letter of permission for these activities is really going to be a roadmap. It's a roadmap of here's what we need from you under this letter of permission individual permit. Here's the information we need from you. And it helps you step through everything that you need to provide us. So that creates an efficiency. It's transparency. You'll know what we need. And if we get what we need, we can move through this relatively quickly. As you can see the bottom, 60 to 90 days. Typically our individual permit evaluations, we strive for 120 days. That's dependent on the complexity and level of controversy an individual permit application may have. So we're really excited about this. Again, dam removal. I don't know where we're at in Rhode Island with dams. You'll have to excuse my ignorance. But Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont have a lot of dams that are looking to come out in the next couple of years. And they've asked for us to look into this. So we're excited about it. Again, it's a roadmap. The other beauty is we're going to be talking with our state partners about a request for water quality certification and a request for coastal zone management consistency determinations. So typically when you would apply for a individual permit with the Corps of Engineers, you would also have to request water quality certification, coastal zone management, and those can take some time to review. And so we're going to be working very closely with our partners very soon, as Bertie tells me, to request those water quality certifications and CZM consistency so that that letter of permission process is really streamlined for the regulated community. So we're excited about these 2 new tools. And again, we're going to be around today to talk more about that. And I would say, can't make a promise, but you should be seeing a public notice for a proposed development LOP and a proposed dam removal LOP in the near future. So we're excited, and we're excited to receive comments on that. I'm not going to ask for any questions because we're trying to hold those to the end, but thank you. And my next favorite topic, which I don't get to speak on today, is RRS. Craig?
Thank you, Colin. Oof, that's a lot of information. This is head hurt, feel overwhelmed. Legitimate if you do feel that way. But as Colin mentioned, a favorite subject of ours in the Corps regulatory is the RRS, the Regulatory Request System. Show of hands, has anyone used RRS? Yes. Woo. Okay. All right, Ross, what'd you think? You can be honest with us. You can be honest.
Sure.
Okay.
Again?
Did it let you send it to the Corps?
Yes.
And that means you filled everything out.
Yeah, so, I just wasn't quite sure if I hit all the buttons.
That's my presentation for today, so thank you, Rod. I'll hit on some of the things that we're excited about and some of the benefits, Russ, that you probably saw and some of you folks also saw when you were kind of working through that. So again, we are very incredibly excited. This is a nationwide tool. So we're using this in every district across the nation, not nationwide like nationwide permits, but across the nation, we're using the regulatory request system, and that is the preferred method for submitting information or requests. And we'll get into some of the differences in the request here shortly. But really, the benefits are pretty self-evident, right? I mean, we're in the digital age. Everything's done online in databases. Colin actually had an awesome analogy the other day of when we used to do our taxes, and we would write them out on the forms a long time ago. And then got Tax Act came around and H&R Block, and now everything's done in a database online, gets submitted to the IRS immediately. Maybe we get a notification that we're getting a refund, or sometimes we have to pay in a little bit extra. So, but at least we get that immediate feedback. And that's kind of the same with the RRS. So again, eliminating paper applications, mailing, sending things to a central inbox. As you work through the RRS and some of the requests, there's a ton of help options here. There's specific kind of tabs or pages dedicated to help. I'll get into shortly. But then even as you work through the requests and some of the questions that are presented, there's a little icon for help, and you can click on that. If you're not quite sure what we're looking for, what that means, click on that and it'll give you some guidance on kind of what we're looking for when you go through to answer the questions. So very, very helpful, tons of resources. Real-time communication and user-friendly dashboard. We'll get into the dashboard here shortly, but again, you hit submit, and shortly after that, you get a status update on where things are at. And once we assign it, you'll get that information right away too. So you'll get the project number, who your point of contact is. It's very, very quick and helps. You don't have to follow up with phone calls or emails saying, gee, I submitted this thing last week. Where are y'all at on this? There's online access to regulatory information. So built into the system, there's a lot of different information regarding the regulatory program. I'll touch on that shortly. And then when we get into the dashboard, you'll be able to see how you can draft requests before submitting. You can kind of work through the process before actually submitting a formal submission or request. You can download information. You can share your request with others, maybe in your organization or your consulting firm, in case there's multiple folks that are working on that specific action. And not listed on here, but I think one of the biggest benefits on the core side is, again, the databases talk to each other. And so we take kind of the initial data entry off the plates of our project managers. We get things in via email. Now we got to transcribe that into a database. These talk to each other. And so we take that off. That gives the project managers a lot more time to review the request, maybe ask for additional information, or move forward with your request. More timely permit decisions, right? That's the goal here. And I think this tool does a really, really great job of accomplishing that. To get to the RRS, you can go to the New England webpage. Recommend you bookmark this, though if you're like me, I've got way too many bookmarks, so at that point it's kind of not as helpful. But you can get there. You can see on the upper right corner, there's the tool there. You can also fire up your favorite search engine and just type in RRS or regulatory request system, and it'll bring you right there online as well. On our webpage, you see the icon, and there's also, like I mentioned, a lot of training, a lot of help options. You can see there's, in addition to the tool, we have the press release kind of talking about all the benefits of the RRS, frequently asked questions, and then there's a really nice training that I actually went through the other day just to kind of see what it's all about, and really helpful consultant and agent training. Again, walking you through the system and the tool. When you get into RRS, you'll see this is what the home page looks like. At the top are all the actions. The bottom is just kind of background information, so you can learn about our regulatory program, mitigation, avoidance minimization, compensatory mitigation, different permitting information, and then jurisdictional information as well, which kind of gets at what we regulate and where we regulate as far as waters of the United States goes. And then at the top are the actions, but I wanted to highlight the RRS support. So if you go to a tab on RRS support that'll bring you into a page, and you can submit. There's a few different options in there. You can submit tickets. So if you're running into issues as you're working through the tool, you can submit questions that way. You can submit general questions. There's another option to get you contact information for the local core regulatory office. So if you're having troubles, you can find contact information, reach out to us anytime, please. We're happy to discuss this with you and try to help walk you through the tool. And then there's also a feedback option. And I know we were talking about feedback earlier, but we want this to be as user-friendly, as beneficial for you all as for us. And so if you're going through the tool and you think, gee, things could be done a little bit differently, or I wish there was this option, feel free to add that into the feedback. We can take that back to our team and kind of assess how we can build that into the tool. So that's a nice component of the system to provide that feedback. Hey, it's great, or this is terrible. You all need to do something completely different, and here's my recommendations. We certainly welcome that. So starting the request, we'll get into that shortly, but you also have the opportunity to look at public notices and provide comments. So you can click on the public notices. I'll hit on that again just shortly, some of the details there. And then you suspect something's going on out there without proper authorization, you can report violations as well in that top actions row. All right, so we're going to start a new request. So once you hit that request button, this is what you get brought into. You got myriad options here, and I'll go through briefly all of the options. We have a no permit required option that gets at activity-based jurisdiction. So is the work I'm doing regulated? Is that a regulated activity? It does not get into, is it water of the United States or not? Is that aquatic resource a water of the U.S.? This just looks at like the work that you're doing and is it regulated? We also have a non-PCN or non-pre-construction notification tool. It's actually in beta test right now, so it's not live, but we're getting there, and that's going to be really, really fantastic for the regulated public to kind of help them self-certify or self-regulate, essentially. You can go through that tool, and at the end, it'll kick out a letter if you qualify for that non-PCN that many of the folks were talking about here earlier. We have the delineation and jurisdiction kind of options in here. And so you can submit aquatic resource delineations to help support your request, or you can request jurisdictional determinations. And that's where we get at, is the aquatic resource a water of the United States or not? And then if you determine you need to submit a pre-construction notification, you do that under the permits, the PCN. And that'll walk you through all of the information. Remember, condition 32, I think it was, what's required for a complete PCN. That's all built into this tool. So as long as you answer the questions, you're very likely to have a complete pre-construction notification, and then we can move forward with your review. And then if you can't use the PCN tool, or your project doesn't qualify for PCN nationwide, maybe it's more complex, exceeds thresholds in the nationwide, that's where you would apply for that individual permit, that Department of Army permit. And last but not least, because I think this is one of the most beneficial tools that we have in regulatory, is the pre-application kind of request or option. So sometimes when we work through maybe like the no permit required based on your answers, if the system might say, hey, you should have a pre-application meeting. Okay, let's talk about your request a little bit more. Let's get some additional details. Or as you're planning your project, I strongly encourage utilizing pre-application meetings or coordinations with our project managers, even before you complete kind of your plans or your development of the project, because that allows us to have conversations about your project and maybe guide you certain ways on the most efficient kind of process and path to get you to a yes, which is, what we want to try to do, work with you guys to get to a yes on your project. So we can do a ton of work in that pre-application phase. We don't have to have a complete application or a complete PCN to do some work up front. So again, strongly encourage pre-application coordinations. If you have any questions, our project managers are more than happy to kind of help walk you through that process. Okay, here's just a look, excuse me, a look at the request dashboard. So when you put a request in, it'll be draft, it'll be submitted. It kind of shows you the status here. If it's completed, like you were issued a verification or a permit, it'll show complete. You can withdraw things in there. So that just kind of gives you a nice status of where your project is at. Once it's assigned, on the kind of right side of the screen there, you'll see it'll give you a project number called the DA number. So that's the project number. But then maybe even more importantly is the project manager or the contact information. So again, once it's assigned, immediately you get to see who your point of contact is. You can reach out to them for questions if you have any questions or want to work with your project manager as you guys move forward. Okay, and then I talked a little bit earlier about document sharing, how you can add users to your request. So this is where you can like manage access. You can, again, add users. You can manage permission for those users. So you can have read and or write capabilities. Again, if there's multiple individuals working on a project, they all have access to your request. They can enter information, review information, download. You can download information in there. Whoever you provide that access to can have, again, kind of like read or review access or full capabilities to help support and edit your request. So kind of a neat, relatively new capability built into the RRS. Then here's just a look at the public notice. Remember on that home screen, we have the public notice options. So you can pull that up. You can see what's going on in your geographic area. You can search, you can filter, project type, geographic location, states, etc. The cool thing about this is when you see there's a public notice and if you're interested in it, you can go in there and review it. But then you can also provide comments to that. And it's very efficient on our end because, again, everything's talking to each other. So we get those comments right away. We can build those into our review. We can reach out if we have questions, things like that. So it's a much more efficient kind of comment process for public notices. Okay, and then I'll hit a little bit on what I think I said self-regulated earlier. We can call it self-verification, self-certified, what have you. But here's kind of the tools that we have available or that are being constructed to help you self-regulate. Again, you work through this process, you don't even need to talk to us. The system's going to get you an answer immediately and you know, okay, I can move forward, or all right, I got to back up and I got to work with the Corps a little bit. So no permit required. I already went into that. That's activity-based again, so not whether the resource is water of the United States or not. So that is hot. And then again, coming soon in beta test right now is that non-PCN. And the tool will walk you through and it will screen against all of those general conditions, those regional general conditions that we have built into the nationwides. And if you don't trip any of those triggers at the end of that process, you'll get a letter saying you are covered by the non-notification for the whatever nationwide permit you're working with. So again, really neat tool. Looking forward to that thing going live here soon. It's going to be really efficient. It's going to take a lot of workload off of our project managers. So that's beneficial when we have to review some of those more complex projects or the things that do require PCNs. But again, it also gets you all answers almost immediately. So looking forward to that going live soon. That is it. I think we're going to hold off, right?
Yeah, we're gonna switch gears. Adherence is gonna present next, I believe. So I'm gonna pull up theirs and we'll still hold questions till the very end. So just bear with me. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen while I switch over to folks. Let's see. And that one.
Okay, while Bertie is searching for the slide deck, before we lose that thread, if someone's using the RRS and they go to hit submit and it doesn't submit, does it show you where the data are missing or where some information is missing?
In this, so we're actually working through that a little bit yesterday, and we're assessing to maybe build in those capabilities if it kicks something back. Why is it? So we're trying kind of figuring that out. One thing that I did forget to mention though is, of course, the more information you provide in the tool, the better, right? But not sure is an option. So if you're just not sure, you can click on that and it'll still carry you forward. It may then end up kind of in a different bin, so to speak, and maybe it kicks you into that application coordination recommendation. But just remember that not sure is an acceptable answer.
Thank you all. Again, Jeff Willis from the Coastal Resources Management Council. Appreciate you all coming here. I know we're talking in the context of nationwide permits, but I'm going to step back a little bit and do a little CRMC 101, but also talk about federal consistency. And Colin, I appreciate your slide where at the very bottom you said this doesn't, if you go through the nationwide permit process, this doesn't negate the fact that you still need state permits. You will always need a state permit, at least from CRMC, for these types of activities that you're proposing. That permit, once in hand, we call them assents. Once you have that a permit in hand, that'll satisfy the Corps' requirement that you've received CZM consistency for the nationwide permit or the federal permit process. Right, just to clarify that, but you're still going to need to go through the state process to get your actual state permit. Which one?
I think you might have to just click
That
there. Yeah.
side.
Is it not one? There we go. We did it.
Just to back up a little bit, CRMC's jurisdiction very similar to the Corps when it's in water or affecting wetlands, but it's pretty clear. Anything in the tidal waters out to the 3-mile limit. Along the shore, we've defined 7 different types of shoreline features. From the inland edge of that feature, 200 feet inland is our primary jurisdiction you want a permit for. Then we have a certain other management plans, special area management plans, essentially watershed plans within a watershed. Certain activities need additional review. Freshwater wetlands in the vicinity of the coast. Chuck and I can explain that. Marty's here too. The state has divided which agency you go to for freshwater wetland impacts. And then in our legislation, we can look statewide at certain activities that might affect the coastal zone. Rarely invoked, but it's available to us. And then, of course, when we're in federal waters outside of state jurisdiction, direct federal agency actions or applicants seeking a permit from a federal agency out in federal waters, we have the ability to invoke our federal consistency authorities, which I'll get to at the end of the presentation. So again, just a visual representation. Our first tier jurisdiction is out in the tidal waters up to the shoreline feature and then 200 feet inland of that. And then the second tier for federal consistency purposes is the entirety of the 21 coastal communities. So anywhere, if a federal agency wants to do an action anywhere in the 21 coastal communities, it has to go through the CZM program for a federal consistency review. And then again, the statewide for certain activities. And there they are, they're listed there. Again, not necessarily invoked all the time, but we have done the energy generation one fairly recently. A lot of folks think our jurisdiction is right along the shore. It never really is. And we use this slide quite a bit to explain and show visually the jurisdiction of the agency. For those of you familiar with the Rhode Island shoreline, this is Quanakataug and Inigret Ponds down in Charlestown primarily. And you can see we have obviously tidal water jurisdiction, and then we have certain physiographic features along the shore that we have defined as shoreline features. 200 feet inland of those is our primary jurisdiction, but you can see we have freshwater wetlands below Route 1. That's that division line that I talked about with DEM. If you have a freshwater wetland below, in this case, Route 1, you're going to come to CRMC. You don't have to go to DEM. Where 25, 30 years ago, Marty, Chuck, you did have to go to both agencies, but we got smart back then. I think we're still doing all right. And then for sand plan boundaries, what you see north of Route 1, fairly far away from the shoreline, there are certain activities that you're still going to have to come to us for a permit. I know the staff that are online that are watching this might disagree with me a little bit, but in my opinion, These are the major issues that we look at, that staff looks at when an application comes in the door, regardless if it's for a state asset or we're doing a federal consistency review. We're going to look to see the activity. If it's affecting a wetland, we're going to want to make sure it's really as far back as possible. We are going to incorporate buffer zones between the activity and the feature. We're going to look to stormwater management, and we're going to look at what exists on the site for structural lot coverage and how much bigger you might want to make it, and then might have to impose additional set of regulations because of that. I'm going to be a little flippant here, and I'm going to apologize, but if you come to the CRMC and you want to build along the shore, if you do two things, you're pretty much in good stead. If you can move your structure up, you can push it back as far as you can on the lot, you're doing really well. There are, of course, other issues that we're going to have to look at, but if we can move you as far away from the shore and some of the issues that the shoreline experiences, erosion, storms, et cetera, sea level rise, you're going to be in a good position to move forward with the project. And this is why. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here, but we have spent a good deal of energy changing the program, incorporating issues into the program that deal with climate change. We follow and believe that in accordance with the NOAA intermediate high curve, that the seas are rising at a particular rate. And so you can see we started to get serious about this issue in the early 2000s. About 2004, 2005, we sat down with a bunch of partners and figured out what are we going to do to address this climate change issue in Rhode Island. So in 2006, we actually developed some regulations. And you can see that this is what, at certain tides of the day, at certain tides of the year, what climate change is doing to Rhode Island shoreline. So these are the four corners of Narragansett Bay. You got Upper Bay, you got Lower Bay, you got East and West Bays, and you can see the effects of high tide. Now, these are not storm conditions. These are moon high tide conditions on these certain particular properties in this area. But what I'm not showing you is that they were taken 13 years ago, 14 years ago. So these pictures need to be updated because they're going to be even worse today than they were back then. So this is a graph we use quite often to explain why we felt in 2005, 2006, it was an important issue to incorporate into the coastal program, and that here we are 20 years later, things are pretty much shaken out that way that we thought back then. So today, if you use the intermediate high curve, we're in an approximate where you're seeing those pictures plus a few more inches. And if we travel out to mid-century to 2055, we're all talking that we're probably going to experience another foot of sea level rise, maybe a little more. So we're right on that curve. So we think what we've incorporated into the program is something that any applicant for an ascent has to seriously look at for their activity to make sure that it will be there in 2055 and beyond. Again, move it up, move it back. So how do we tie them all together? We developed a special area management plan that's called the Shoreline Change Special Area Management Plan. We locally refer to as the Beach SAMP. And within the Beach SAMP, we've developed two tools to help you understand what the issues could be on your particular parcel. And Storm Tools is a very powerful tool that gets you to understand, because it brings results with a 95% confidence level, that in a given storm, at a given sea level rise scenario, or a combination of the two, you can understand how deep the water will be at your property and to what extent the water will extend into your property. What I don't have on here is also return some erosion rate issues as well. So this is a very powerful tool to get you to understand your activity relative to how its success will be measured in the future. The story I usually tell with this slide is that for those Rhode Islanders in the room, Alex Kuffner is a Providence Journal environmental reporter. When we first started developing this, he and his wife were looking to buy a house. And so the areas that they were looking at around Narragansett Bay, they found a site in Barrington that they really liked. Well, if you know Storm Tools a little bit, you know that the East Bay, and particularly Barrington, Warren, Bristol, are pretty much the lowest points you can have in the bay. And for sea level rise scenarios, you are going to get a lot of inundation in sea level rise generally, or on top of that at a storm. He and his wife went through the storm tools tool for the parcel that they were looking at and decided the risks were too great to make an offer on that property, and backed out of that particular deal. So it's a good story to tell. He allows us to let us tell it. But it's a tool that works really well to get you to understand what particular issues might be happening on your site. The other tool, and this is all developed with our partner at the University of Rhode Island. I don't want to dismiss the input that they had in this. The engineering folks really know what they're doing down there. And this Coastal Environmental Risk Index also takes E911 data, which knows E911 knows the residential type of structure category that you have. Is it one story? Is it one story has a basement on a slab? Same thing with the structure having 2 stories, a basement slab, or is it on piles? Coastal Risk Index will take those same scenarios you plugged into storm tools, sea level rise of X, storm return frequency of Y, and will tell you under those scenarios how much damage those structures are anticipated to have. So red, if you see a red dot, it's 100% damage. If you see a yellow dot, it's less than that. And so I throw up this slide today, and this is a scenario of today with just a 100-year storm coming through. There's no sea level rise. So it would be sea level rise as of today. This is the Ninigret Breachway and Ninigret Barrier. And you can see all the homes on the barrier would have 100% damage to them. And as you go in along the back side of the pond, you still get 100% damage, and then you find your way to green where they would not be damaged. But it's also a very visual and powerful tool to understand what the issues are. All right, I put that in, and I know we're talking federal consistency as well, but I put that in because anytime we have to invoke federal consistency when we're reviewing a direct federal agency action, or someone that needs a permit from a federal agency, the issues are the same. The impacts are the same. Staff questions are the same. What changes is the level of the decision end of the process, where if it's a direct federal agency action, you have to be consistent to the maximum extent practicable. If someone's applying for a permit for your applying to your agency for a permit, they're going to have to be consistent. So there are the issues that we ask, and the information we ask, and the review we put through in federal consistency. And we did this with your staff, Tammy and Beth, to get those conditions into the nationwide permit, are based on those threshold levels that we have to look at ordinarily if these federal programs at the Corps didn't exist anyway. And you can see this, back up. This is just places where you can find the information on federal consistency. We have our own federal consistency manual, and of course NOAA has developed theirs because the Coastal Zone Management Act is out of the NOAA umbrella, if you will, and we are under the NOAA umbrella as the Coastal Zone Management Agency in Rhode Island. And these are the different subparts of the CZMA that we look at for federal consistency issues. And I forgot whose slide it was, but there was a great slide that one of you put up that listed a number of different activities that are pretty similar to this list here. So the activities that the Corps has to look at for its nationwide permit program, when it comes to federal consistency review and some of the conditions that we put on the nationwide permits, are out of here as well, because we look at the same activities. But again, we're asking certain questions, and the issues that we're asking questions for you to address are going to be to get your state permit, but they're pretty much the same type of issues as we go through federal consistency here. All right, so those are the different subparts that we do. Direct federal agency activities, folks requiring a license or permit from you all, and then outer continental shelf stuff, which is for Rhode Island right now, wind farms. This is just an example of what a direct federal action could be. Right now, we're dealing with your navigation folks and the construction folks on dredging the Providence River shipping channel. Part of that is going to develop a confined aquatic disposal cell off Edgewood Shoals, direct federal action. We go through federal consistency as part of that sign off, which you will get. We look at issues like this and what are the impacts going to be from dredging, from disposal, where are you gonna put the material that you take out of there? Same issues that we would if you were a private applicant. But again, it's just the level of decision-making that changes. Even fishery management plans, and Chuck and Marty, if you guys have this poster somewhere in the building, I'd really like it. I might have to go down to Jamestown to get it. It's really good, like that. But even a fishery management plan that comes through our desk, we have to look at it from a federal consistency standpoint and sign off on that. This is my last slide. So again, I just wanted to drive home the point, and I apologize for it not being entirely clear. The activities that we're looking at that have to go and get a federal permit, primarily through the Corps, and then you all go out to EPA, Fish and Wildlife, et cetera, for assistance there, are the same issues that we look at the state level. Our questions to get you all, your level of federal consistency review met, are the same questions we ask state applicants. The issues, the impacts are the same. It's just at the end, is the activity entirely consistent because they're getting a federal license or permit, or if it's a direct action by a federal agency, is it to the maximum extent practicable? I think that's all I have. I had some extra slides. Let me see. I don't know if I really want to go into this one. And I don't want to go into that. So thank you very much. Back out of this.
That was excellent. Okay, I'm just gonna pull up items presentation. I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment. Sure. We're going to present. We're going to turn off that. Shrink that. Shrink that. Go over here. Share. This one. Okay, let me shrink that. And oh, did I? Are you seeing the right thing? You're right. Okay. Perfect.
So you can show me how it would be.
Yeah, you just click the button there.
Just, there's a button there.
Yeah, like, well, click that button and then that.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, sorry, it's not
Okay.
super high tech.
All right, again, I'm Chuck Warbert. In the Office of Water Resources. We act as the certification authority, certifying authority for water quality certifications for the permits that Army Corps are issuing that we're talking about today. So thank you again for being here. I think I'm the last speaker, so I'm going to bring it home. Special shout out to all those enthusiastic folks in the very front row here. So these are the programs, the Rhode programs that intersect with the permitting that Army Corps is doing in New England. We've got the freshwater wetlands program. They're also reviewing projects that require Section 404 permitting, dredge and discharge of dredge and fill material. You have the water quality certification program that I oversee. We are the ones that will issue water quality certifications, either for individual permits or for the general permits and nationwide permits that we're talking about here today. We also issue certifications for projects like new marinas or structures in navigable waters. That's Section 10. Section 9, I think, is bridges that the Coast Guard has to review. Anyways, then on the CRMC end, which Jeff talked about, freshwater wetlands in the vicinity of coast, they handle that. Again, Section 404, and coastal permitting, also Section 404, and they do a lot of stuff that intersects with the River and Harbors Act, Sections 9 and 10. So again, right now, federal permitting is handled mostly under the Rhode Island general permit. It's pretty rare that we get an individual permit application in Rhode Island. It's happened a couple times, I think, but mostly the general permit handles all of that. And as we all learned today, we're going to be transitioning to the nationwide permits. So I'm going to talk mostly about, I'm not going to go into a lot of details about the state programs, because you guys don't want to be here till the end of the week. I'm going to focus mostly on what we've been doing at the water quality certification level for the general permits and the nationwide permits. So the general permit that we've been talking about, it was actually issued in 2022, but most recently they issued another general permit December 6, 2023 to fix errors that occurred in the 2022 general permit. We worked very closely with the Corps to identify those errors and to find a pathway to get those fixed. They issued a modification request for our certification that we issued. And we issued that in September of 2025. Actually, we issued our original water quality cert in 2023 to fix those errors. Then they decided that before they reissued that general permit, they wanted to make some changes. So they wanted to, I think, change some programmatic general permits to regional general permits. A couple other modifications that they wanted to make in the water quality cert. So a couple of years later, September 2025, we issued another modified water quality certification for that permit, the general permit, and Army Corps just recently issued that in Rhode Island, December 6th. So those are the, November, right? November was the general permit that got issued. So again, that's the general permits. So when we issued a water quality certification for that general permit, some things to know about that. We waived water quality certification for any of the activities in non-tidal waters that were exempt, either under our DEM freshwater wetland regs or under the CRMC regulations. If a state permit is required, and it could be any, I'll go over some of those permits in a little bit. The water quality certification includes a condition that you also have to get the state permit in order for the water quality cert to be valid for that Rhode Island general permit. So even though you might fit under the general permit, and even if you get written notification from the Corps that you're covered under that general permit, it doesn't mean that you can just go ahead with your project. You still also need to get that state permit as well. It includes some Rhode Island specific low flow restrictions, the July 1 through October 31, which a lot of you are probably already familiar with, and some time of year restrictions for in-stream work because of certain fisheries impacts that we're concerned about. Those are all in the general permit, and most of those are going to go away with the new nationwide permit, right? So while we were all like wrapping all of that up for the Rhode Island general permit, we had got word from Army Corps saying, hey, by the way, we're going to change everything and go to nationwide permits instead. So that's when we started looking at the water quality cert for nationwide permits. And I appreciate Birdie, and I can't remember your name, saying how great it was to work with the state, but it was not easy. I think we began, I think our first meeting, we were basically telling them, well, we might not even give you water quality certification for any of the nationwide permits. And we really said that without knowing a single thing about the nationwide permits. These are not a new thing. They're just a new thing in Rhode Island. You know, nationwide permits have been in place since, I don't know when, 1980s, 1987, 77. See, before I even worked at DEM, before I was even in high school. But they've never been implemented anywhere in New England. The Army Corps in New England has decided that it was better and closer to the New England programs to try to cover those with general permits. And we didn't even do general permits in New England, I think, until 1997. So we've come a long way. And so are the nationwide permits. I mean, one of the reasons why those weren't even implemented in New England is because they weren't that great. They allowed a lot of activities that we were not going to allow anywhere in New England. they have improved. In fact, I think some of these cases, the nationwide permits are going to be more protective than even our general permits right now. Anyways, so for the water quality certification that we issued, and when we were talking to Army Corps about that, they constantly wanted to meet with us, like every 2 weeks. And every 2 weeks, we'd be like, we don't have anything to talk about because we're still working on our new electronic permitting system and trying to get that to work. So they started talking to us before these were even advertised in July. I don't think we started seriously talking about it until November. I think I was telling these guys, talk to us in December, when we have to make a decision in December. But they were great. They were very helpful in explaining things to us. And we gradually came to the point where instead of denying water quality cert for all of them, we granted water quality cert for nearly all of them. So we don't require water quality cert for nationwide permits that are not proposed in New England. They're not proposed to be implemented. Things like coal mining activities, structures in artificial canals, those are not going to be implemented in New England. So we didn't have to worry about those. Nationwide permit number 8, we didn't have to issue for that because it's only applicable seaward of the territorial seas. These things are out on the outer continental shelf. We don't see these things. And if we ever did see them, I don't have to issue a water quality cert. And then there's these 4 nationwide permits: navigation aids, mooring buoys, temporary recreational structures, maintenance of existing marinas. And this is low key maintenance stuff that we would consider to be either exempt or are not really expected to result in a discharge to waters of the U.S. that's going to require water quality cert. We looked at these activities and said, these are never going to result in a discharge that we have to worry about. So we did not issue on those. They're basically certified. Did I just blow through a bunch of slides? Yes, so I did blow through a bunch of slides. Where was I? Oop, let's go back forward. Bear with me. I apologize. I did not have a lot of time to prepare for this, so I kind of threw this together over a pretty short period of time. All right, so we have waived water quality certifications for any activities in any of the nationwide permits that are in non-tidal waters and exempt under our DEM rules or the CRMC rules. So there's no need for us to review a project if it's exempt, even our own state permitting. Whatever we did authorize, we authorized conditionally. So we issued a conditional water quality certification for the activities that we authorized. And it was based on the conditions of you need to comply with any notification requirements. And Bertie talked a lot about that, about some of the nationwide permits that have notifications that you need to do. You need to comply with all of the general conditions, as well as any of the applicable regional conditions. That's a condition of the water quality cert. And most importantly, you must have obtained all applicable state permits. So none of the nationwide permits are applicable or valid in the state of Rhode Island unless you have obtained a state permit under the state program that might require you to get a permit. If you don't need a state permit for it, you're good, but usually you need a state permit because the intersection between the state programs and the federal programs has been shrinking, right? 10 years ago, we pretty much regulated the same areas of land with the exception of buffer zones. Now, if you've been paying attention at all to the changes in the definition of waters of the U.S., the most recently proposed definition of waters of the U.S., I don't know. I think I'm being generous if I say that that might cover 50% of the waters of Rhode Island that we regulate. Probably, well, I've heard some estimates of 20-something%. I don't know if you have any insight on that, Erica. No. Yeah. So it's small. And you only need one of these nationwide permits if you're in a water of the US. But again, even if you get that permit, you still need the state permit to go forward. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So some of those applicable state permits, they may include any of these. So a freshwater wetlands permit from DEM, a dam safety permit from DEM if you're going to do any work on significant or high hazard dams, a state water quality cert. There's actually two kinds of water quality certifications, and they're very different. What I'm mostly talking about today is the water quality certification, which we issued for the federal permits under Section 401 of the Clean Water Act. But we have our own state water quality regulations, and it's a state permit. We also call it a water quality certification, but it's your state permit for some of these activities. And these are things like discharge of dredge or fill material, not in a water of the US, but in a water of the state. Or things like docks in the coastal area. You need a water quality certification for that, with an issuance of a CRMC assent for that kind of stuff. Two different water quality certs. Sometimes you need both of them. Dredge permits, freshwater wetlands permits for wetlands in the vicinity of the coast that Jeff talked about, and any assent for activities in the coast. So if your project requires a permit from any of these different programs, you need to obtain that permit before your nationwide permit or general permits are valid in the state of Rhode Island. I got to catch up on my notes here. Again, I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for this thing. So, yeah. So how do you, this is going to be a brief interlude. You know, how do you actually get these permits? Like Army Corps, we have developed our own electronic. We've gone completely paperless for most of the water resources programs. You need to come into our new application permitting portal, which is supposed to improve things for us. We've had some things that have worked fine since we've implemented it. We have some things that never worked since we've implemented it, and we've got things that worked that no longer work. But my therapist says I shouldn't talk about it. So just, you know, the takeaway is we do have an electronic permitting system that this is the portal that you at least get your state permits from DEM. CRMC, I don't know how that is handled yet. I think you're going to try to do something similar, but right now you're still all paper. Okay. All right, so getting back to the nationwide permits and the water quality certification that we issued for it, we did deny water quality certification for 2 nationwide permits. One of them is for completed enforcement actions. The reason for that is that nationwide permit allows up to 5 acres of fill to stay in waters of the US. And we're like, well, a couple things. One, we're at the state level are probably not going to allow you to keep that amount of fill in the state to satisfy our enforcement action against an applicant. Not only that, but again, this water of the US thing, right? That's only 5 acres of fill or whatever in a water of the US. That probably doesn't even cover the amount of fill that's in the adjacent wetland that is in a water of the US. And it isn't covering buffer zones at all. So we're like, well, we're not going to approve this nationwide permit. This is something that in the event there is an enforcement action that allows any kind of fill to remain in wetland, it's going to require a 401 water quality cert in addition to whatever state permits or satisfaction of enforcement, maybe a consent agreement to satisfy the enforcement action from DEM or from CRMC. And then nationwide permit 43, stormwater management facilities. That nationwide permit does include some maintenance activities to stormwater facilities, which maintenance in, I think, our regulations and CRMC's regulations, those are exempt activities, which we waive water quality cert for. But it also allows construction of new facilities into waters of the US. So if you're in a water of the US, you are definitely in a water of the state. And we don't have a lot of outright prohibitions in our wetland rules. We'll give you a permit for anything if you can satisfy our requirements. But stormwater BMPs within a wetland is not one of those. That's an absolute prohibition. We don't, I mean, that's the type of activity I wouldn't even suggest you even try to come in for a Section 401 water quality certification for, because it isn't covered in the nationwide permit. Don't even bother. I think we've approved one of those in the last 30 years. And the only reason we approved that one is because the wetland was already pretty much acting as a detention facility itself. But we're not going to permit new stormwater BMPs into a state wetland. So again, if you have a project that would normally be covered under one of these nationwide permits, the water quality certification does not cover you at the 401 level. You have to come into us for an individual 401 certification. All right, so speaking of 401 certification rules, that has been another thing that's my world for these last 2 years or last 5 years, more than that maybe. My world has been changing definition of the waters of the United States and changes in the 401 certification rules, and is whipsawed back and forth I don't know how many times. Right after they advertised a proposed new definition of waters of the US, which I don't think that's finalized yet, right? They're still, the comment period is over, but they are still, they still got to go through that and issue the final rule, but it ain't gonna be good, in my opinion. Same thing with the certification rules. We had a water quality certification rule in place from 1971, and that worked for everybody until 2020. And then they changed it, and they changed it substantially. And immediately it was subject to a lot of lawsuits from the states. And it wasn't in effect for very long. And I think when it was in effect, it was only in effect for half the country. Although I might be confusing that with waters of the US. And then when the new administration came in 2021, they immediately went to another rulemaking, a rulemaking effort to not go back to the 1971 rule. They did keep some parts of the 2020 rule, but they fixed all the things that most of the states were screaming bloody hell over. So all the lawsuits got thrown back, and everybody was like, yeah, this is still increasing a burden to the state, but at least it's a reasonable burden and we're good with it. And now we've got a new proposed certification rule that just was advertised this past January, which very much goes back to some of the things that were proposed in 2020 and implemented in 2020. I am currently working on reviewing those things, and comments are due on these in about a week. So if you guys want some interesting reading, go and see this proposed rule, offer some comments. It's a lot of fun. Let me tell you about it. And I have no idea what to expect when these changes are going to be in place, whether they're going to go forward. It's likely to be subject to litigation by the states and other non-government organizations, just like the 2020 rules were. My personal opinion is that despite the opinion of the administration and the current EPA that these things are going to streamline and make things easier and clearer for applicants, I don't think it's going to be that. I think it's going to make things more difficult for applicants, and it's definitely going to make things more difficult for the state. And if it's more difficult for the state, it's definitely going to be more difficult for the applicants. That's just the bottom line. And it's not going to save anybody any time. And it's definitely not going to do anything to improve water quality. So that pretty much covers, I think, the what I had to go over as far as where the state intersects with the Army Corps of Engineers. You know, we do have, actually, you know what? I think I did skip a slide, didn't I? I did. So water quality certification, we don't do this just for Army Corps of Engineers. There's other permits that we have to issue 401 water quality certifications. FERC is a big one, right? Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for interstate pipelines and hydropower. Hydropower is another thing that burns a lot of my time. Projects requiring Section 404 permits, we are talking about that. Those are things that are not already covered by a general permit or the new nationwide permit. Section 9 or 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, and bridge projects requiring approval from the U.S. Coast Guard, which primarily those are bridges over navigable waterways. That also requires a Section 401, in case you were curious. So that's it for me, and I guess I'll take any questions about state interaction with Army Corps and that kind of interaction between Army Corps permits and state programs. Okay.
It have for more simplified permit, single family, that were once combined with the state permit process. For instance, Dock Essence were once handled by CRMC and did not require separate permit from the Army Corps. Not sure if DEM had similar, but need to understand what permits to submit for our clients to Army Corps when dealing with non-residential projects. Also, if we need to submit to Army Corps, are there any checklists, et cetera, to help with civil requirements? Because we never had to do this before. Is training coming up for single family development, specifically for consultants?
Okay, so the quick answer to that is no and no. We're not working on a flow chart, although I think that's a good idea. It really becomes a resource issue where that requires manpower that right now we do not have because we're focused on other things right now. But it's something that I think we will need to work on to, and we do have a lot of guidance available for single family homeowners to describe at least, not in a flowchart way, but at least describe what kind of permits are available, what types of things you need to satisfy in order to get a permit, at least from the state level. The interaction between the state and the federal and trying to describe that, that was a lot easier when the definition of waters of the U.S. closely matched the state definition. That was back in the days when we did have programmatic general permits where we're all reviewing the same thing and we could issue one permit that would cover everything and be simplified. That is no longer the case. So really where we are at right now is an applicant has no choice but to get two separate permits. That's it. So DEM can work on flow charts and guidance on how to get your permits for single family houses or any project on our own. But we can't really, there is no real way to describe the coordination. You know, the other part of that is you also need to get your federal permit. And the description of how to do that is really the responsibility of the federal agencies. And I do think that they also have guidance available as well to help. But unfortunately, it's two separate permits, two separate agencies. They have very different permitting pathways. Without a return to a jurisdictional paradigm that more closely matches between the two, I don't see how that's going to improve. So I think I covered the question.
I'll take the part about the core.
Yeah, because there was part about just core permitting.
Yeah, so I think part of the question was, are we going to provide training on residential or single family development? So we can definitely take that as a request if that's a need. I mentioned earlier that we're designing a webinar series after our face-to-face outreach. So we're happy to walk folks through the application process. RRS does walk you through and step by step what questions there are to complete an application, very similar to filling out your taxes. You go from one segment to another, and if you didn't complete the first one, you can't submit. So it's really great as far as pointing you to submitting a complete application. Let's see, I think that covers it. Yeah, you covered the rest.
Yeah, and I would say that there are very few single-family house projects in the state of Rhode Island that would even trigger Army Corps permitting. About the only ones that you might see are, tiny slam jam lots where they don't have any choice but to fill within some kind of water in the U.S. And I think that's more likely to occur in the coastal region than it is in the inland regions. Or if you're crossing a river that also meets the definition of water of the U.S. That's about the only time that you'd see single family permitting. Any other questions on state level permitting from DEM or water quality certification?
Clarifying question, because we both touched on this, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm not clear, which means other people probably aren't clear. So with the change to the nationwide permits, will an applicant still need to acquire their state permit in order to satisfy the water quality certification and coastal zone consistency before they can proceed with construction? Is that
Yes.
still going to be true?
Yes. Yep. That is a specific condition of the water quality certification that we issue, that if you need a state permit, if a state permitting requirement is triggered, you need to obtain that permit before the 401 water quality certification is satisfied.
And just to clarify, that's true for non-reporting activities under the nationwide as well.
Yes. So again, if you look at your nationwide permits, you say, okay, I've got nationwide permit 20, whatever that is, right? I meet all the requirements of that. I don't have to report, because it's a non-reporting thing. I go through all my regional conditions. Great. I meet all these, general conditions. I meet all the regional conditions. And then I read the water quality certification and I'm like, oh, I need a state permit. That's where it stops. Then that's when you need to go get your state permit. Make sure that you're covered under the state permit, whatever that state permit is, even if it's just a state water quality certification, which happens a lot in the coastal zone. Then you are covered both under the state and under the nationwide permit. So, good question.
Yeah.
Anything else until you open up to others? Yes, Scott.
December cert file. 22 on 011.
Oh yeah, it does have a file number, but I don't have it. That's not one of the many permit numbers I know by heart yet. But I think it's 23 dash, you might even know it, Beth. 018. Yeah, yeah, right. But I'll tell you, the easiest way to find that is to go right to the Army Corps website. And when they publish the nationwide permits, they're going to include that water quality cert right there. You just open that link and you'll see it.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm gonna stop sharing again because I'm gonna put our survey QR code up and share that with you guys while we go over questions. But we talked a lot about our state certifying authority partners, and we left out the fact that on tribal lands and federal lands, EPA is the certifying authority. There are no tribes that act as certifying authority for their own land, so EPA does that. So we also worked very closely with EPA. They were in a lot of the same meetings with the state with us and put in a lot of hard work getting those certifications done for us as well.
On that topic,
Mhm.
and it's a bit of confusion on this, the state of Rhode Island is the certification authority for all Narragansett tribal lands.
Oh, okay.
in Rhode Island. I don't know if EPA issues separate certification for them, but our certificate, we are considered to be the certification authority. In there, they're also subject to all state permits as well. So they can't go forward without getting a state permit. That was part of what they call the Narragansett Settlement Act in Rhode Island, where as part of being granted the reservation lands that they have in the state, they are required to satisfy all state permits. So again, although they're a recognized tribe from the federal government, they are required to meet all state permits. There's obviously a bone of contention between us and the tribe on that, but this has been litigated pretty often. That's kind of what the status.
Okay. Well, thank you. I was not tracking that. It's
not
all covered.
anything, but yeah, our certification does cover any activities in the tribal.
Okay, perfect. Well, with that, I put up on the screen, and is it sharing correctly on the Teams, Chandra? I just want to double check. Okay, perfect. Ready for questions, but while you're sitting here or later on today, if you wouldn't mind going to our feedback survey. I know we've mentioned it about 40 times already today, but we really would love to hear your feedback, how we can improve our messaging, what things you still have questions about or want to know more detail about. We would love to hear from you. But with that, I think we're ready for questions, and we'll start with folks in the room. And once we've kind of exhausted those, we'll go to the questions we received online. So in the room, any questions? Don't be shy.
The question, non-reporting projects.
Mhm.
What if you have a project or client project that needs some type of confirmation from that's simply not reporting? Get that the RRS system or?
Yeah.
You know,
So just for folks, I'm going to repeat the question just so folks online can hear us. So the question was for non-reporting projects, if the client wants essentially verification that their project is non-notifying, do they get that from a core project manager or RRS? And the intent of that tool in RRS is to get that confirmation through RRS. You very much are welcome to call us and walk through that with us. And, you know, as a project manager myself, I have sent follow-up emails that say, based on the information you provided to me and our conversation on this date, it would appear that your project qualifies for this non-notifying nationwide permit. So that's something we can potentially do too, but that RRS system is going to be super duper useful. You don't have to call us and talk to us if you don't want to.
Add to that as well. You can also, if you desire it for whatever reason, request a written verification for something that still fits under the non-reporting threshold. So even though it could be non-reporting, if your client or you, whatever reason, or there's some controversy with the project, don't feel comfortable self-verifying, you may still request a written verification and go through the PCN process for that nationwide, even though it wouldn't necessarily be required.
That's absolutely correct. You can still request a verification for projects that are non-notifying. Just repeating in case folks can hear. It's okay. All right, any other questions in the room? I saw a couple hands. Yes.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback on this question, in terms of judgment calls, I noticed there's a few references to adverse or loss. How do we determine, is an adverse effect significant? Is it not significant enough that we need to file, or are we safe not to? Any guidance on that?
So The question was, how do you determine what's an adverse effect? Are you talking about impacts to waters or like an adverse effect on historic properties or endangered species on waters? Okay, so loss of waters is defined in the nationwide permit program in the Federal Register that issues the nationwide permits, and it's pretty specifically defined. So if there's going to be a permanent loss of waters, that's the impact we're looking at, and that's the impact you're going to look at least for the nationwide permit. That's going to potentially trigger a pre-construction notification. Some of them also say a discharge within a special aquatic site, including wetlands, that triggers a PCN. But any loss of waters that's directly related to the activity that's regulated, so essentially a fill or a work that results in a loss of waters, is what we're looking at. It's not necessarily like, well, I'm filling this water. Is that an adverse effect? It's no, you filled the water. That's what we're looking at. Does that answer your question? Okay. The clarification. Yeah, go ahead.
So each activity has an acreage impact. So if you meet that threshold, you go over the threshold, that's one trigger. But also if your property or action is within historic district, if it has travel concerns, if it's an endangered species mapped area, those types of things, EFH will also push it into a PCN from a non-notification to a PCN. So those are the triggers.
And I'd also just add that, we're talking about self-regulation and really empowering you folks to make decisions, but that can be really nerve-wracking, right? Like if I answer this, my reputation might be on the line. So again, this is liability. So that we're here still, like, yes, the RRS is here, but let's talk, like, let's work this out together. Just because we have the RRS doesn't mean we can't help you, but we acknowledge that, there's ways to answer that question and you're not sure. Their question marks are in there. So again, Craig had mentioned, there's a lot of good information on the RRS platform, information to help you, videos to help you, but at the end of the day, call us. Like we do want to help you. We want to get your confidence up in making these decisions. Because like you said, liability and risk and reputation are really critical.
Thanks for saying that. With the RRS, it's almost like hands-off sometimes from our perspective, but we've had pre-apps and they're working great.
Yep.
So appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, you can request pre-apps through the RRS and submit.
That's what I've volunteered for so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Please, if you are ever at all in question whether an impact is adverse or not, or you're near a threshold, absolutely come to us, get that, reassurance or confidence, get your question answered. Use it, request a pre-app the RRS or something like that, because that's, we want to make sure, especially early on in this transition to the nationwides, we want to make sure everybody's feeling comfortable with this. That's what we're here for.
Great, thank you.
Erica, did you have something to add to
Yeah,
that?
to clarify something about the significant adverse effect, something you should always be concerned about. However, no general permit, no activity that's authorized under a general permit should theoretically result in what is considered technically a significant adverse effect, because all the permits have to comply with the 404B1 guidelines, and that includes the general permits as a whole. So the general permits are written ideally very specifically to include only activities which are not deemed to result in a significant adverse effect on waters of the U.S. That doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but if you are carefully complying with the term of the general permit, all of the conditions and all of the regional conditions, it is unlikely that your activity would, under the legal definition of a significant adverse effect, which is not clarified anywhere, just so that you know. There is no guidance on what is actually a significant adverse effect, but if you are concerned, that's where the pre-application meeting is always.
And I will thank you. I will piggyback on that as well. I think a lot of this too has to do with the idea of looking at these thresholds, looking at these impact limits, and trying to figure out which nationwide your project might fit under, where your thresholds are. You as the public, you are not responsible for knowing which nationwide permit you're going to need. It is helpful to look and try and figure it out. There might be several that it can fit under. When you apply through the RRS, it will ask you which nationwide or RGP you think it's going to be. But That is our job. You can submit your project to us. You can say, I don't know. It might ask, pick one, take your best shot. We will determine it and contact you and follow up with you. You can have a pre-app first if you want to and let you know, yes, your project fits under this and this, this nationwide permit's going to be the best match for it. And we will work with you and explain to you, how it fits. And if you're close and maybe there is, over a threshold, we're love to work with you to find a way to reduce those impacts or find a way to minimize those in order to get you under a nationwide.
Yeah. That's a great discussion.
Talking about triggering. There was a slide early on about certain political districts that trigger occasions while the Scenic River and Endangered Species Act on historic properties. So kind of like from a high level scoping perspective, SB versus PCN, by just existing in those mapped areas, does that automatically trigger PCN, or do you have to work through the consultation processes to reach a no effect determination to then be eligible for self-verification or document reporting?
Well, it depends. Yeah, I'm gonna let either Grace or Tammy talk about that particular, because we've got things cooking up.
Yeah, so under ESA, Grace went over the two questions that really trigger, we keep using this trigger word, trigger PCN under general condition 18 for endangered species. And that's if the species or proposed species is in the vicinity of, or your project is in the vicinity of, or if it might have an effect on the species. And so we offer the D key, Fish and Wildlife Service D key, to walk you through some of those questions so the public can determine if species is in the vicinity or might be affected. We also are working through a designation of the non-federal representative. So designating the public to work their way through the D keys for us. But we still need to tie that PCN trigger back to those two questions. So in many cases, if you can get through those questions and your project would result in no effect, in most cases that is essentially the same terminology as those two questions. There might be a couple of cases if you get to and not likely to adversely affect, all depending on if it's the time of year restriction that is the reason why the species wouldn't be in the vicinity of the project and vice versa. So we're writing instructions for the public, so more to come on that. And we're also happy to have a specific webinar just on endangered species. And we know to focus on the bats because yes, they're everywhere. So we're appreciate the question. We're definitely coming up with some more guidance on that.
Trigger as well, or do you just
in that case, it's probably a good idea to check in with us, even if it's just a pre-application meeting, because we want to determine the effect of the project we're authorizing or the undertaking, the federal undertaking, the effect of that federal undertaking on properties that are listed that might be outside our permit area, but within the area of potential effect. And Nancy, go ahead. Anything to add?
I would just add, yeah, it's not the prospective permittee's responsibility to get to that effect point.
Yeah,
right. So that's the federal
absolutely
agency's responsibility. Reach out, whether it's pre-app or even just a phone call to me or the project manager, and we can work through what the appropriate path forward is. But easy answer is likely yes, it's a trigger under general condition 20 if it's within an historic property. But we'll take a closer look at what the actual federal undertaking is within that historic property or that historic district, for example. Make sense?
What question? Yep.
Really quick, you mentioned consultation should voting proposed. The recommendation of the King of Tribes engage.
I'm gonna let Nancy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we're excited to align here with the rest of the nation with general condition 20, because you're right. Typically, no response from a TIPO is typical, but a lot of times that's because it's not the federal agency reaching out. So again, it's couched as an information request. Is there a resource of concern here? Here's my project location. Here's a map or a figure. If you have any information you'd like to share, great. If you receive something, absolutely include that within the pre-construction notification. And then it's our responsibility as the federal agency to then thereafter appropriately consult or coordinate. It's going to go back to a phrase and it just left my head, but we understand it, often no response, but at least reaching out provides you maybe some information, or maybe no information, but maybe reaching out to the SHPO does provide a known resource there, or the SHPO can opine on archaeological potential at that location, and therefore then trigger PC under general condition 20. I keep losing the thought that I want to go back to, and I'll just stand up over here or I'll catch you afterwards and I remember what that thought is.
Any other questions in the room? Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, that is, section 10. Having adverse effect on more than you asked, but what are the causes of no appreciable opposition? How do you determine that?
Alan's already.
Yeah, that's a great question. What is appreciable opposition? So the first step in this process is to actually public notice the letter of permission procedures, and we'd be asking the public for feedback. And so if we got a lot of opposition, we may need to revisit that decision. There are times when we may be situationally aware of an activity that has opposition. We may put that out on public notice to see if there is appreciable opposition. And if we don't receive that opposition, we may then track that as a letter of permission, but we may not be able to use the letter of permission. We may have to elevate that to a standard individual permit. So there's
Follow up.
Yeah.
So are you looking for public opposition within your main metropolitan jurisdiction? Is that correct?
Yeah, we're not looking for opposition. Just to be clear. Yeah, we have to be very careful with what's within our federal control and responsibility. So, there are things that may not be.
Well,
Go ahead, jump in.
Our public interest review factors, it's in, 325.4. Look at a host of different things, but it's related to the activity we would regulate. So, I'm trying to think of a good one off the top of my head, but consideration of property ownership. What's another good? Navigation, floodplains, we have to look, it's not just the impacts that we regulate, but what impacts to other public interest factors that activity may have.
And just to be clear, again, the letter of permission is really the roadmap. And so perhaps maybe the activity does have appreciable opposition, but if you follow that roadmap, that should also create efficiencies for the standard individual permit review. So that it's a really good tool, even if we did have appreciable opposition. So we're trying to set folks up for success. Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions in the room before we move online? Yes.
So in the RRS, we've been doing the agent authorization form. And there's been some back and forth within our own agency, our own organization, that should the signing agent be the engineer of record or the person actually submitting the application in the system, or a mix of both?
That's a good question.
You mean as the applicant, who should the applicant?
So if the applicant is signing it, does it need to reference a specific individual, in terms of the engineer, or just uploaded the form and whoever submits the application? So we only, we try to limit the number of people we have submitting applications, sort of keep it a little more organized. So if I'm submitting all the applications, but I'm not the engineer of record, does that impact on your end at all?
It does not happen.
Mason, please repeat. Oh, I'm sorry. So the question was, if you're submitting on RRS, if the person who's submitting isn't essentially the POC from that agency or that consultant, does that cause issues on the course end? And Colin's keyed up, but I also saw Mason keyed up.
Yeah, let me walk down here. Sorry. Loud, but maybe not that loud. Are you
me just clarify. Are you talking about the person signing the PCN or the application form, or who's actually uploading it and submitting it to the RRS system?
So there's a place in the RRS to have an agent authorization form signed.
Yeah.
Who is representing the applicant? Is it, and she's,
So-
is it the engineer of record or is it somebody else?
Both. So for the agent application, we'll have the applicant sign the form and then we upload it. And then I'm submitting the digital pieces. Does that piece impact? Does who submits that impact?
Who submitted does not, but on our PCN and application forms, there is a signature requirement at the bottom. And so the applicant is required to sign the PCN form or the application form, but then you, as the authorized agent, can handle all communication, points of contact, upload, whatever from that point forward.
Signature, not the authorization.
You mean the person that's authorized you as the agent? Yes, typically. It should. If it doesn't, you can reach out to us and we can, deal with something like that on a one-on-one basis. Typically, it's going to be much easier if those coincide, because whoever's signature and is listed under the applicant on that PCN or engineering form is who the verification letter or permit is going to be issued to. And so we want them to be obviously also the one, granting authorization to you as an agent or whoever it may be to work on their behalf.
And you had mentioned engineer of record. Are you trying to figure out, should the engineer of record be the authorized agent?
That was the second.
Yeah. So honestly, the person that we're looking for is who should we be communicating with for this activity? So if you put the engineer of record, we're going to be emailing your engineer of record who may not really want to talk to us. Sorry, hopefully there's no engineers in the room. But yeah, that's who we're looking. And just to take that one step further, again, engineering plans are not required in our program. They're great, but it's not a requirement of the program. We need plans that articulate what's being proposed, but they don't have to be stamped drawings. You'd be surprised at some of the drawings we receive. Thanks.
Any other questions before we move? Yes.
Another. Pretty new to it, so just working through it, the project recently, and it seems like the fields, when you're in the impact section, the fields ask you for length and width of the area, but it automatically associates it with a permanent loss, even if you're checking no for permanent loss. So how do you portray that in the RRS? And this might be a thing that I can email somebody that doesn't automatically generate the need for mitigation. So say it's just temporary work for section 10 over an applicable water way, where you have to input something in those values to make it applicable to 0, but then it's automatically generating the need for mitigation.
So the question for the folks online, the question was, RRS essentially doesn't allow you to input temporary impacts. Even if an impact is temporary, it makes an assumption that it's permanent, which triggers the need for mitigation. So I'm not super duper familiar with RRS, but I do want to clarify that for a complete PCN, we do need a mitigation statement. So a statement of how impacts were avoided, minimized, and then if they couldn't be avoided and minimized, how those unavoidable impacts are proposed to be compensated for. So that's going to be required no matter what your impacts are, permanent or temporary. It's going to ask that question. That's just a part of a complete pre-construction notification. As for RRS assuming impacts are all permanent, yeah,
A couple things.
there's
You identify aquatic resources. So there's a category for that. And then I think there's a drop down of type of impact, permanent, temporary, dredging, flooding. So that should give you an opportunity
I
to.
can speak to this. I don't have the answer, but I have seen this happen too. So I don't want you to think you're crazy. Yeah, I've only seen it specific to section 10 only submissions.
I think if you're submitting a section 404 project, the temporary permanent impacts kind of go smoothly. But I've seen this with other applicants that have contacted us. If they're submitting a section 10 only, even if they put temporary impact, when they submit an impact value, it records it as permanent loss. And then, yeah, asks for, mitigation. What's your proposal for mitigation and things like that. So this is a problem that we have seen, and I don't know if it's gotten
A good one for the
completely
feedback
run up the
button.
chain yet, but
But I would also suggest there's a spot in RRS to write a project description. And so you can clarify in that project description so that the PM who gets your project isn't thrown off by what's being presented. And definitely put that in the feedback. We're apparently aware. So hopefully it's working its way up the chain to the national team that's working on our RRS development.
And our term, when we use mitigation, it's not just compensatory mitigation, it's really minimization, avoidance, minimization, and then compensatory mitigation.
Yeah.
So just remember that mitigation term is broad.
It's actually one of those things that I really hound on. Like when people say, oh, is mitigation required? It's always required. You're always required to avoid. You're always required to minimize. And depending on what the unavoidable impacts are, you may be required to compensate. But compensatory mitigation is just one part of mitigation. I really like to drive that home in new regulators. Don't just use the word mitigation if you're requiring compensatory mitigation. Any other questions in the room? Okay, so I think we can go to the questions online. Do you want to just read the questions from there, Chandra? And also if folks, need to leave.
I think you'll have to repeat them though if she reads them.
Well, if she has her mic on.
Oh,
she
good.
can.
Okay.
Yeah. But again, if folks in the room need to leave because it is 12 o'clock in lunch. Oops, sorry. It's going to create feedback. Oh, my bad. Okay. Sorry, folks online.
Can she bring the computer?
Do you want to bring the computer up here? And I know it's a
So the questions here, but then the Teams is right here, so you can look at them and see if your questions came in.
okay. All right, thanks, Shandra. Yeah. All right. How do I look? All right. So the questions online. The first one is from Liz. It says, this is one for Nancy, are municipal historic sites covered by this general condition, i.e. town/city considers it a historic site, but the state doesn't?
So general condition 20 is specific for the federal agencies' responsibilities under section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. So technically, if it's not a federal register list or considered eligible for listing in the federal register, our RD doesn't cover it. Doesn't mean that we're not going to take into account resources if we find during our review, but technically it has to be federally listed or eligible for listing in the National Register properties.
So municipally,
Got a representative from SHPO tax here.
so municipally designated are typically also designated in the state register with also national register.
And then going on that point, Elizabeth, then under state law, does that trigger a review or some
It's in the
complaints? Thank you.
Okay, and I just want to double check because our mic is a little bit behind us now. Can folks online hear us okay? Looking for some, maybe in the chat. Okay, Jacob asked if Federal Highways is a lead federal agency. Okay, they can hear us. Perfect. If Federal Highways is lead federal agency, will their section 106 review satisfy general condition 20, even if certain types of exempted projects covered under Rhode Island section 106 programmatic agreement do not require notification with the SHPO and or TIPO? If so, what documentation will be required to satisfy general condition 20 for these types of projects? Sorry, Nancy, I should have had you.
Stay up here. I don't know if I understand all the details of the question, but Yes, we defer to the lead federal agency. Our agency requires that in writing, so federal highways delegating to the Department of Transportation in many of our states. And they just need to show documentation of compliance of Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act.
So what would that documentation look like exactly?
So the question for folks in the room was what might that compliance documentation look like? So the concurrence letter from the SHPO, showing the finding of effect from the federal agency and thereafter the SHPO's concurrence. Or
Well,
if there is
for
adverse
certain
effect on
types of
historic
projects,
property.
for certain types of projects, the Rhode Island Department of Transportation is the delegated authority, and they don't require any concurrence letter from the SHPO or TIPO.
So sorry. I'm turning my volume up on my computer. Could you repeat that?
Under the Section 106 programmatic agreement for the state of Rhode Island from Federal Highway, signed between the State Historic Preservation Office and the Rhode Island Department of Transportation, the Rhode Island Department of Transportation is the delegated authority for certain types of exempted projects, and it does not require a concurrence letter from either the SHPO or TIPO.
Yeah, thank you for that. That is common within the programmatic agreements between FHWA and DOT. So as I understand it, being part of other PAs in other states, the FHWA has allowed the Corps to be part of those discussions and part of that agreement. That consultation and coordination is done up front. That's how the federal agency, the DOT, the State Historic Preservation Officer are able to get to those categories. And I'm sorry, in the room here, I'm looking to Elizabeth as well. She appears to be nodding. So Elizabeth, you.
Okay. And there are exempted activities in that PA, and they've also exempted.
Yeah, as far as a Section 106 review, we would defer to that lead federal agency and that existing PA.
So I think if you get a project manager who's not familiar with that programmatic agreement, if you just bring that programmatic agreement to their attention, then that should be sufficient documentation.
Yeah, putting it right in the project description, the existing statewide PA with FHWA, DOT, State Historic Preservation Officer, ...
Okay. And that would go for projects where the TIPO wasn't necessarily notified either under certain types of projects, and Federal Highway as the lead federal agency had made that decision.
For that lead federal agency decision, when that programmatic agreement is being developed and drafted and the agencies working together, that federal agency has conducted the appropriate consultation under the National Historic Preservation Act.
For some projects, they've decided that the TIPO will not be notified.
Would that be for like no potential to cause effect determination?
There may be
Occasionally it's for projects with no historic properties present, and then for some other projects, it's for a no adverse effect finding on historic properties. There would be no notification to the TIPO, and then for projects with no historic properties present, for certain exempted projects, neither the SHPO nor the TIPO are notified, although the SHPO is notified bi-weekly through a spreadsheet that is that's sent to them through email. However, there is no concurrence letter.
Yeah, I certainly could follow up with you to discuss this in more detail. So I can kind of better understand the ins and outs. Does that sound good?
That sounds great, because we've had a lot of projects that have been held up by this very issue.
Yeah, we absolutely want to get you the most efficient process or permitting avenue that we can. So I will follow up. Could you put your name, if you haven't already, into the chat?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, just navigating back to questions. We got a noisy truck outside. The next question is from Jay, and it says, is it possible to develop an LOP for standard design level site investigations such as soil boring, which are generally exempt activities under RIDEM and CRMC regulations? So I'm happy to say that activities such as soil boring are typically covered by nationwide permit 5, right, which is survey activities by
Scientific measurement.
or scientific med, 6 is survey
Oh, yeah,
activities.
yeah.
I always get those two mixed up. They're very close and they're both, I believe they're both non-notifying. So we don't need to develop an LOP because it's already an activity covered by the nationwide permit. Let's see, the next question is from Michelle. Well, this is an RMS question, so get ready. How do you add supplemental materials after you've submitted a PCN and the USACE requests additional information or has questions? The current USACE PM I'm working with on a PCN had me just email her because I couldn't seem to add supplemental materials during the review process. Can you provide some guidance on the process for that?
Yeah, I could probably talk a little bit about that. So in the dashboard, if you remember what that looked like, where you were able to see the status of your project, there's what's called request requiring information. So if the project manager requests information, you're going to get notified and you go into that tab and then you can upload information into that, into the RRS. So as far as this specific question goes, remember RRS is the request. Okay, so you might, once you're in the review, you might work directly with your project manager to provide maybe additional information, supplemental information, help support the review. And so if you've submitted a request and you want to upload more information to support the request, you may actually have to submit a new request under that same DA number, that same project number. But if you're kind of mid-review, you might just be working directly with your project manager to provide that information. So I think kind of making the distinction between the requests and then where you're at in the review process might dictate whether you work through the RRS or you work directly with your project manager.
And we're still transitioning, fully to RRS. So some project managers may choose to email you with a request for additional information, in which case you would probably just respond through email. But we're also building that functionality into RRS, where you may get a message from the RRS saying, hey, we need more stuff. And then I think there's a place in RRS for you to respond and attach that additional information. If you don't want to just type it on a box, or you have a memo or some other means of memorializing that information. So that RRS is the future. We're continuously improving it. We're making improvements. We need your feedback. This is really the future. And really, email is great, but how many people have an email box with only 2 or 3 messages, right? Everything gets buried. So we're really hoping the RRS could be a really good tool of communication with y'all.
Okay, the next question is from another Michelle. Does USACE have a definition / distance on what is considered immediate vicinity? The term is used in Nationwide Permit 3 for maintenance, where stream modification in the immediate vicinity is allowed for in paragraph A. Without a PCN, while maintenance outside of the immediate vicinity up to 200 feet away is allowed for in paragraph B with a PCN. But there is no associated distance to determine if an activity is within the immediate vicinity or not. That's a great question. And essentially the answer is there is not a definition as to what constitutes the immediate vicinity. So I always tell folks when looking at Nationwide Permit 3 for maintenance and determining, if it fits, essentially Nationwide Permit 3 is for replacement or repair in kind. So what was there, you're just fixing it, you're repairing it, you're not really adding on to it unless those additions are very small where they're needed because engineering design standards for the state or the city have changed and you're required to do it that certain way. And I think that's outlined in Nationwide Permit 3. But if you're going way far out from what was originally there and permitted, it probably doesn't fit a 3. Does anyone else from the board want to add on to that? No? All right. The next question is from Wendy. Can the regional general permits under GP 10 that are or have been developed by Maine and New Hampshire for dam removal be shared? So you can access each state's regional general permits on our website. Maine's, they're all on there. Maine's is on there. New Hampshire's is on there. Maine currently doesn't have a mechanism in place to authorize dam removal until the nationwide permits go into effect. Then they'll be able to use the nationwide permit for removal of low-head dams, which unfortunately won't be super helpful for them because many of their dams will be too large to be considered a low-head dam. But that's where our LLP development is going to come in and hopefully fill that gap. But if you navigate to our website, you should be able to see both the Maine RGPs and the New Hampshire RGPs and any other state's RGPs on our website. Let's see. The next question is from Robert. Under the RRS impacts and mitigation, is there a resource within the RRS to help with populating the impacts table? Difficulties with type of activity and whether they overlap with each other, identifying what is considered temporary or permanent, showing areas that are not easily determined by a length and width come to mind. This is, yeah, I think this is similar to the question we had in the room. Essentially, definitely use that feedback button to help us improve our RRS. And you're always encouraged to write a robust project description that outlines. If you can't get the impacts into the field as you would like them to be within RRS, the project description where you can essentially write what your project is, that's the best place to make those clarifications, I think.
That, and there's also bulk upload option. So if you have a lot of impacts, a lot of resources, you can put it in a CSV file. There's instructions on the RS, kind of recommendations on how to lay all of that out. So that is an option as well. So an interesting question, and it got me thinking about, if I'm interpreting it right, maybe I'm not, but what if you have like two different types of impacts in the same spot? So you have an excavation and then a backfill. I'm wondering if that's what the question is getting, like how should they identify that? What type of activity or impact should that be identified as?
Yeah.
The other thing is, like with Teams these days, we can jump on, and do a screen share and we can help folks. Again, we want to teach you, we want to invest in you and your use of RRS. So if you've got a POC, hey, can you jump on a Teams call, screen share, and then we can help walk you through some of this stuff too if you find yourself at a dead end. So let's work together. I love that.
Thank you.
I think that is all of the questions online. I didn't see any new ones come through. So I'm going to pass this to Grace. I'm going to pass it to Grace, and Grace will close out our meeting. Do you put up Teams? Oh, I bet not trip over the cord.
I know, because you're sandwiched. Well, thank you all. We've had really good discussion. As a reminder, if you haven't signed in, please do so before you leave. And if you'd like to give us feedback, we've asked for it a lot. Please do that as well. And we'd like to thank you all for attending. We are going to be planning some more outreach events in the future. As Tammy mentioned, we'll have some webinars specific to the nationwide permits, but we're also looking at doing some outreach on dredging specifically and some other things as people identify it. So thank you again. We'd like to extend our big thanks to our colleagues with CRMC and Rhode, particularly for hosting us today. And now the meeting is officially concluded. Thank you.